Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you for your patience. I got my wife a sandwich at a local deli. I was making my way back here. My phone had died. Had a great conversation with a comrade, but now I am here and we are going to have yet another one of our great late night conversations. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and I will bring on the opening music. So let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. I am so glad to be here with you all tonight. It's going to be yet another one of our great late night conversations. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the way we do things on this channel, I generally give my opening remarks, which is whatever it is that I'm planning to talk about for this evening. Then after that, we do a roll call. We find out who it is who's watching around the country, who's watching. And then after the roll call, and that point, I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So if you've got something you'd like me to talk about in the second half of our show, all you need to do is send a Rumble rant on the Rumble or a super chat here on YouTube. I agree with M Series. We do need a government of action to fight for working families. That's the slogan that the Center for Political Innovation has put forward. We need a government of action to fight for working families. And that is the organization that is behind all of this, the Center for Political Innovation. And we would love to have you as a member. We've got 160 members in different parts of the country. And we just had a couple people join in the last few days. So join the Center for Political Innovation. I will put that in the chat, and I will post the link. We would love to have you as a member. We have Zoom calls every Saturday, study groups, local meetups, activism, etc. It's always great to have people in CPI. So join the Center for Political Innovation. It's a great organization doing great work around the country. Coming up, we do have a few announcements, the biggest of which is coming up in Los Angeles. It's going to be the Peace Cup 2024 Los Angeles. I was just on with Craig Pasta-Jardula on his YouTube channel this afternoon, pitching it, talking about how amazing it is going to be. Peace Cup 2024 is in Los Angeles, and the theme of this year is making sure that Peace Cup 2025 is in Pyongyang. That is the plan. So, if you want to support peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, come out to Peace Cup on June 28th to June 30th in Los Angeles. It's hosted by the LA Galaxy soccer team. It's going to be awesome. And it looks like I'll be headed out there for it. Not yet confirmed. We are thinking about doing a fundraiser stream on this channel about Peace Cup. So I'm in touch with different people involved with the Peace Cup. Peace Cup is a great effort, and it's dedicated to peace with North Korea. We just had a great event out in Los Angeles at LA Family Church. Shout out to everyone who was there. That was great. And if you haven't watched the video yet, it's the latest video on the channel. It was really, really a great thing that we did. So the next big thing on the agenda is the Peace Cup. So keep that in mind. In other news, all kinds of developments are breaking forth. People are certainly angry at the status quo. People are opposing these wars and the drive toward war. A lot of exciting things are happening in this world. So if you want to be part of everything that's happening, we could always use you in the Center for Political Innovation. And I will I will show you a quick clip of some of what we do.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
To the masses! To the masses! To the masses! To the masses! Dare to win! Dare to win! Dare to win!
So, welcome everybody. I'm glad to be back. I know that there's a mobilization going on to support the People's Democratic Uhuru movement in Florida taking place at the end of June. So if someone can send me a poster for that, we want to support anything about the Uhuru movement. That is the most serious case in the country right now. If they can throw them in prison for their anti-war activism, they can essentially outlaw being an anti-war activist in the United States. We've got to support the Uhuru movement in everything that we do. We've had Chairman O'Malley on this channel. We've been raising their case at international venues, at the United Nations and elsewhere. So keep your eye on the Hands Off Uhuru movement. Support Chairman O'Malley. Support the Uhuru movement. And on that note, folks, I'll be jumping into my opening remarks for tonight. So if you've got something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the program, by all means, I would encourage you to send me a super chat on YouTube or a Rumble rant on the Rumble. That's the best way to get your question answered. The whole second half of the show is me answering your questions. That's what it is. So make good use of it. So for my opening remarks tonight, I wanted to talk about, what I put in for the news hook. I don't know if you saw this. So this is kind of, it was brought up recently. I think it's a bit of an honor. It was John McCarthy. Shout out to John, our member in Chicago, who does a lot of activism for the Uhuru movement and just a beloved member of the Center for Political Innovation. John, he brought to my attention that one of these organizations that's funded by the Ukrainian government decided to put out a big hit piece, one of these big hit pieces that has a list of every group in the United States that takes an anti-war position. And it had a lot of different people in it. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's been opposing sending weapons to Ukraine, and different newspapers, and Tucker Carlson, and all kinds of people. But they included the Rage Against the War Machine rally, right? Which that's a very important anti-war voice. And then right below it, who did they include? The Center for Political Innovation, Texty, the Center for Countering Disinformation of Ukraine, decided to give a special shout out to us for our anti-war activism. So I was very honored by this, that this Ukrainian government outfit has once again put us on the target, right? That they've once again highlighted us for the important work that we do, right? Because I have already been put on the Ukrainian disinformation terrorist list or whatever. And now our organization and myself are once again on that list, on another list that they put out. And we are absolutely honored to be listed as people that do not support the Azov Battalion. Right? The Azov Battalion is a group of Nazi sympathizers in Ukraine. And the U.S. government just lifted its rules. They've already given billions of dollars to Ukraine, but now the restriction on giving aid to actual Nazis in the Ukrainian military, the openly Nazi division of the Ukrainian military, that rule has been lifted. So now the U.S. government is blatantly and openly funding a Nazi division. Warhawks calling out CPI for standing against fascism. Absolutely based. And we are totally honored. We are absolutely honored to do it. We are absolutely honored to do it. Looks like we do have a poster for the Uhuru event. Thank you, Briggy. I'll show it later on in the stream. We are absolutely honored to be on this list. It is really, really a token of how much we are dedicated to anti-imperialism. I always love it when I get on these lists, and I always love when they come up with shady connections between me and other people. This was more of an honorable mention, but we got a good paragraph out of it, hey, glad to be on the list. But it really goes to show, again, there's a lot of people who don't seem to understand how important what CPI is doing is. They seem to think that it doesn't matter, right? That we just go out in the middle of the woods, or, CPI. No, what we do very much matters. We confronted Tsai Ing-wen when she came to the USA to beg for more weapons to Taiwan. We put on a summit to counter Bill Biden's Summit for Democracy. We have hosted Scott Ritter many times and given him a platform for his arms control, anti-imperialist message. We have been out in the streets supporting the Uhuru movement. We are doing a lot to promote anti-imperialism here in the United States. I just went out to Los Angeles and had an event at LA Family Church to support North Korea, right? Wherever anti-imperialism and the demand of a government of action to fight for working families, wherever that demand is being put forward, we are there, and we're doing it. And I'm proud of what we are doing. I'm very, very proud of what we are doing. It's really an honor. And I am going to keep doing it. And I know many people in our group are going to keep doing it. We have no intention of giving up or surrendering, and we have no intention of becoming an internet club. We're not trying to win a social media contest. We're trying to get shit done. That's what we're trying to do. So I'm really, really glad. I must say, I'm really, really glad. I'm very, very glad. One thing I might just do here for a minute is I am going to put on the clip that we have about Kamala Harris, just because people can't watch this clip about Kamala Harris enough. So I'm going to put this clip on about Kamala Harris. I'm going to show you the Kamala Harris clip. And then when I come back, I'm going to continue my opening remarks. So just watch this. Just watch this for a minute. Bizarre is she's trying to frame herself as Miss Black Lives Matter, when in reality, Kamala Harris was the queen of mass incarceration. Kevin Cooper was hours away from receiving lethal injection. Hours away from it. His lawyers asked that DNA evidence be acquired in order to make sure he was actually guilty of the crime. And Kamala Harris's office tried to prevent DNA evidence from being acquired. They wanted Kevin Cooper to be executed, but the governor of California disagreed. They acquired DNA evidence, and the execution was stopped. The New York Times tells us that she feels really bad about it, for whatever that means. And people can also recall that while she was head of the California State Attorney General's office, over 1,000 people were locked up for smoking marijuana. She presided over jailing a lot of people. And on top of that, the drug labs in the state of California that were being used by the police were turning up false positive results. And yet, Kamala Harris's office did not tell the defense attorneys or the judges about this. They knew that the drug labs were turning over false positives, and people went to prison because her office concealed that their drug labs were turning up false positives. And another thing about Kamala Harris, I don't know if people saw, but there's a video of Kamala Harris where she's bragging about how she jailed the parents of children who were truant from school.
I would not be standing here were it not for the education I received. And I know many of us will say the same thing. And I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my re-election race. But I said, look, I'm done. This is a serious issue, and I've got a little political capital, and I'm going to spend some of it.
Have you seen the clip? And she gets up there and it's the same kind of thing. She's giggling. Yes, I had the idea that we could lock up parents who are truant from school. You know, I wouldn't be anywhere in my life if it weren't for my education. And so not giving a child their education is a crime. And so I jailed parents, and she's giggling about it. It's just so great. And, you know, I see so much in U.S. media. They like to trivialize incarceration. There's so many shows on Netflix and all of that where it ends towards the end where someone goes to jail, but it's part of the happy ending. It's okay. And they don't seem to realize what that means. You know, when one member of a family, when a father or a mother goes to prison, or a brother or a sister, it hurts the entire family. And when Kamala Harris is up there giggling about, oh, you know, I locked up these parents because their kids weren't in school. You know, yeah, kids need to be in school. When kids aren't getting to school, it's a problem. But the worst thing you could do is then throw their parents in jail. That's not going to help the situation in any conceivable way. But when she's joking about it, and she's laughing about it, Kamala Harris, she says, what did she say? She said, well, I wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for my education. It's about her. The big line when she was calling out Joe Biden, when she was trying to contend with Joe Biden in the presidential election, what did she shout at Joe Biden? She shouted, that little girl was me!
You know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
And then her campaign started churning out T-shirts with the face of 10-year-old Kamala Harris on them. Do you remember this? Yes. It's almost like she wants us to vote for her because she was once a 10-year-old child. I mean, that's what it sounds like. What's particularly interesting is, you know, you remember when Barack Obama was running for president. We knew everything about Barack Obama. We knew all about Barack Obama's pastor. We knew about Barack Obama's father from Kenya. We knew the school he went to in Indonesia. But Kamala Harris, barely anybody knows anything about Kamala Harris. Well, Kamala Harris's mother, who's now deceased, was from India, was a cancer researcher. And Kamala Harris's father, Donald Harris, was a Marxist economist, and is a Marxist economist, a professor at Stanford University. He was an advisor to the government of Michael Manley in Jamaica, and he and Kamala are estranged from one another. He did not attend Kamala's inauguration as vice president. They're not on good speaking terms. But the more you look at it, it's very clear that Kamala Harris sees herself as a victim. The way Kamala Harris speaks, the world has been unfair to her. And she blames Donald Harris for that to some degree or other. We don't know why. We also, there's rumors, we don't really know what happened when she was in Quebec. We just know she never talks about the years that she spent in Quebec. But Kamala Harris thinks that she is a victim. And she wants the whole world to know that that little girl was her. And she wants vengeance. And she wants to make people pay. And she wanted to make Kevin Cooper pay. And she wanted to make those parents pay. That's what leftism is if it's stripped of economics. If it's stripped of class struggle, if it's stripped of a desire to have the people rise up and control the means of production, if it's just anger, if it's just revenge, it's just a call for destruction, a call for rebellion, that's what Kamala Harris is. Kamala Harris, she's very much a guillotine meme. That's what she is. It's the glorification of punishment, a desire for revenge, a desire for destruction. And that if you look at the history of socialism around the world, the strength of socialism wasn't the guillotines, it wasn't the firing squads, it wasn't the persecution. That's not what people remember the strength of socialism being. They just did a poll. 75% of Russians say that the Soviet Union was the best time in their history, but they're not thinking that because of executions. This was from a PBS documentary. They interviewed a woman named Tatiana Fedorova.
Stalin set a task. Build this or build that. And thanks to the fact that people trusted him and this enthusiasm of young people, it was possible. Remember, this was a country where people were illiterate, lived in virtual darkness, wore birch bark shoes. Even now, I think it's like something out of a fairy tale. How was it possible at one of the most difficult times to raise these great construction sites? It was only possible through the unity of the people and the love of the people for their idol.
And the reason Stalin remains wildly popular in Russia, it's not because he executed people, it's because he mobilized them to build that country up from nothing. This was a country...
He built some of the world's largest power plants. He wiped out illiteracy, and he built a modern industrial country. He raised millions of people up out of poverty. And then they fought off the Nazi invaders, and then they rebuilt the country again. And a few years later, they were the first country in outer space. And the strength of socialism was not that it punished people and that it persecuted people, but rather that it enabled people to go out and build and construct. I've said to many people, I'm not a socialist because I want to destroy America. I'm a socialist because I want to save America. And we have to save America from the horrors that are being unfolded by an irrational system where profits come before people. I want to save America. I want to build a better world. If all the apparatus they've created for destroying people, for imprisoning people, for breaking people psychologically, could be utilized to build and to construct, if popular power were put in control of the means of production and control of the state apparatus of the United States, we could build something very, very beautiful.
They want you to be mad at Russia and China instead of the looters that are sitting not very far from here off Wall Street, who are actively getting bailouts in the billions, arguably even in the trillions, for their gambling debts. That's what we're here against, and that's why we're taking a stand for freedom of speech, because they're going after the Yahoo movement and anyone who stands against the imperialists, because they know a real threat that's rising. They know we authentically represent the American people. They know that the American people are ready for a change and ready for an end to the wars. And that's why they're cracking down on our First Amendment. They're cracking down on our Fourth Amendment. They're cracking down on all the civil liberties we know and love.
All righty. All righty. So, the reason I showed that clip was because it's actually very related to a lot of things I want to talk about tonight. You know, obviously I appreciate that Elon Musk, you know, has called out this Ukrainian think tank. He's called them terrorists for the fact that they accused a bunch of Americans of being Russian agents. You know, and, you know, I mean, I appreciate that. And there are divisions right now within the ruling class, and seeing Elon Musk call out this Ukrainian think tank that is threatening Americans, I think that's a great thing. But there's something else I wanted to react to that several people have sent me, and I want to thank everyone who sent this to me. A couple people did. You know, I do to some degree or other follow right-wing media, but I don't follow it hugely extensively. But Jordan Peterson released a video on his YouTube channel of him interviewing a guy named Paul Kanger. And I watched the video, and I watched it, and I thought, okay, now I have debunked Jordan Peterson anti-communist videos before. I've debunked Jordan Peterson anti-communist pieces before. And they're usually pretty easy to do. This one is a little bit, I mean, it can be debunked, and on the surface of it, it's really stupid, this new one. But if I debunk it in the wrong way, I could come across as very insensitive, and I could come across as belittling something that we all know is there. And actually, this Jordan Peterson video that is out there is really, really dumb. It's just really, really juvenile, standard anti-communist stupidity. But by debunking it and pointing to the truth in what is said, etc., I can actually teach you all a lot about what we stand for and what CPI is really, really all about. So actually, debunking this video is a lot. There's a lot more there than simply saying, "Oh, this video is dumb." I mean, it's a dumb video. And on the surface, if you are not from the right-wing persuasion, if you're not already like a right-wing anti-communist, if you're not a religious person, the video just looks stupid, right? It just looks stupid, and you could like point and laugh at it, you know. But honestly, if you really think about what it's saying, beyond the anti-communist cliches, it's pointing to something true. And that something true that it points to is actually kind of the basis for our unique understanding as the city building tendency. So I'm going to debunk the video. I'm going to debunk the video, but I'm going to do it carefully and with nuance, right? I think Tyler just sent me a clip of it. Somebody sent it to me the other day. Someone tweeted it at me, and you know, it's a dumb video, but it's pointing to something true that is true in a way that the guy talking about it, I'm sure, doesn't even remotely understand. But first things first, right? This guy Paul Kanger, right, I guess is his name, and he is an anti-communist scholar, right, and he has done videos for PragerU before, and I actually debunked one of his videos before, his video, Who is Karl Marx, because he just said so many inaccurate things in that video. I felt a need to debunk it. So this is just so you know who Paul Kanger is. He made this video for PragerU about who is Karl Marx, and I just completely debunked it. So that'll be the first thing I'll show you. I'll just show you debunking Paul Kanger's PragerU video. Then from there, we'll put on his recent chat with Jordan Peterson, and we'll take it apart piece by piece. But we'll also acknowledge what's true in it in a way that I'm sure he doesn't understand. So this is my debunk of Paul Kanger's Who is Karl Marx video for PragerU.
Hey folks, so the right-wing YouTube channel PragerU made a video supposedly addressing the question, who was Karl Marx? Now there's so many things in this video that are just wildly inaccurate and incorrect, I don't really know where to begin. But I'm going to go over just a few of the wildly inaccurate statements in this video.
And controls pretty much everything. This notion was widely discussed and debated in European intellectual circles during Marx's lifetime. But nothing much came of it until Vladimir Lenin took power in Russia in 1917.
Not much happened in relation to Marxism after Karl Marx's death until the Russian Revolution, they say. They say it was discussed in intellectual circles. Really? Really? How about the fact that progressive laws were passed all across Europe as Marxist-led movements and political parties demanded things like, 8-hour workdays and progressive legislation? How about the fact that in the United States, Marxists were key in the struggle to overturn slavery? I mean, Marxism, between Marx's death and the Russian Revolution, did all kinds of things. It was one of the biggest mass movements that had ever been seen, especially in Western Europe. Huge social democratic parties and labor parties were formed, unions were formed in factories. Later in the video, he goes on to point out that in the aftermath of Marx's life, the standard of living went up across Europe. And he seems to ignore that that was because there was a huge Marxist movement building labor unions, building progressive organizations, demanding people's rights, fighting against the bosses, and winning these things. He makes it sound like nobody believed in Marxism, no one thought about Marxism, except they were talking about it in intellectual circles. Until the Russian Revolution. That is ridiculous. Until the Russian Revolution, the Marxist movement was biggest in Germany, actually. The German Social Democratic Party, led by Karl Kautsky. There were figures like Edward Bernstein. All across Europe, there was a vast Marxist movement that was key in fighting for the right to vote, fighting for the rights of workers on the job, fighting for the rights of women. How in the world can he say that it was just kind of discussed in intellectual circles until 1917? That is just completely outrageous that he would even say that. He should be embarrassed. This man calls himself a professor of political science. Does he not know where one of the main political parties in Germany, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, originated? Has he never heard of the British Labour Party? Does he know where they came from? But nobody did anything about Marxism. Nobody. Not the Fabian Society, not the Chartist movement, not the labor movement. None of that. Nothing happened. Nothing. They were just talking about it in intellectual circles until 1917. How does anyone take him seriously? Marxism was one of the biggest political movements Europe has ever seen, and it was very, very, very widespread and popular long before the Russian Revolution.
Wherever Marx's ideas were practiced, life got worse. Not by a little, but by a lot. There is not a single exception to this rule. Not the Soviet Union, not Eastern Europe, not China, not North Korea, not Vietnam, not Cuba, not Venezuela, not Bolivia, not Zimbabwe. Wherever Marxism goes, economic collapse, terror, and famine follow.
At the time of the Russian Revolution, Russia was a very, very impoverished country. It had an agrarian economy. Most of the country didn't have running water. Most of the country was illiterate, about 65% illiteracy. Most of the country did not have electricity. By 1936, the Soviet Union had become a world industrial power. They had electrified the entire country. They had provided every person with running water. They had wiped out illiteracy. They had universal employment. Villages that had been huts, you know, where people were living in like primitive conditions, were replaced with modern housing units where everyone had running water and electricity. In 1936, just shortly after the Russian Revolution, just 2 decades after the Russian Revolution, the Soviet Union was producing more steel than any other country in the entire world. In 1936, the Soviet Union had the world's largest hydroelectrical power plant, the Dnieper Dam. The life expectancy vastly improved. The population for the first time had access to education, they had running water, they had electricity, they had access to medical care, but he says that it made life worse. You can criticize the Soviet Union all you want, there were problems there. We're not talking human rights here, we're just talking by objective measure. He says that it made life worse in the Soviet Union and everywhere else. Made life worse. Compare Russia in 1936, after it had fully industrialized with socialism and the 5-year plans of Stalin. Compare it to 1917. By no objective measure is that in any way the case. Living conditions had vastly improved. The standard of living had vastly risen. I mean, and this wasn't just something that communists were saying. Look at the Time magazine articles. Read the New York Times from that period. Read how even like right-wingers were going over there and marveling about it. The whole world was actually blown away by what the Soviet Union was achieving during the 1930s. So for him to say that it made life worse just shows that he's completely out of touch with reality. And he talks about China. You know, he says, oh, and it just made life worse in China too. Really? Really? Let's talk about China. In 1949, there was not a single steel mill in China. Today, half the steel in the entire world is produced in the state-run steel industry in China. The Chinese Communist Party has lifted 700 million people out of poverty. Today, the world tourism industry is having a boom because people whose ancestors, you know, parents and grandparents were peasants who were illiterate and malnourished are now going on vacation to New York City and Paris and London. I mean, the achievements of both the Russian Revolution in terms of making the Soviet Union into a world industrial superpower, the achievements of the Chinese Revolution are vast. How does this man say this with a straight face? I don't understand how someone can say such wildly inaccurate things. I mean, any economic textbook can show you what was achieved in both the Soviet Union and China. At the beginning of the 20th century, Russia and China were deeply poor countries. Today, Russia and China are global superpowers. China has the second largest economy in the world. I don't know how anyone can say this. I mean, this is just outrageous that he can even get away with this. You know, he talks about Cuba. Well, compare the way Cubans live to the way people live in Haiti or the Dominican Republic or other developing countries around the world. You can criticize these countries all you want, but to say that it made life worse, that's just wildly inaccurate. Nobody would say that Cubans' living conditions were better under Batista before 1959 than they are today. Nobody would say that. Nobody would say that. In no objective measure did the conditions get worse. In fact, the Cuban healthcare system is studied all over the world for its achievements. You know, I mean, unbelievable that he can get away with this. But let's get to another part of the video.
So, if cataclysmic failure, meaning terrible human suffering, is the inevitable legacy of Marxism, why do so many people, and now especially young people, defend it? The most common answer Marxism's advocates offer is that they, whoever they are, Lenin, Stalin, Chavez, never really practiced Marxism. They all somehow got it wrong.
Now, this is interesting because he's correct. Now, most people in the USA and in Western Europe who call themselves Marxists will do that. They'll just say, oh, it wasn't real socialism. And you know why that is? Because they're cowards. And because Marxism, the Marxist movement, at this point is largely tied to academia. If you are a Marxist, one of the places for you to get employment is at universities. And if you want to be a Marxist at a university, you can get a grant to write a book about white privilege. You can get a grant to write a book about transgender oppression. But if you write a book challenging the narrative regarding the history of the 20th century and the socialist countries, you're not going to get a grant to publish it, and they're not going to have anything to do with it. Why? Because the universities largely depend on grants and foundations provided by the Rockefellers and the Ford Foundation and lots of very, very well-funded capitalist institutions that do not want to hear this. They have no problem with the cultural side of Marxism. They think gay rights is great. They think that, you know, that women's liberation is great. They have no problem with, you know, the kind of cultural critique.
But when you start defending alternatives to capitalism, they have a big problem with it. But I wanted to go on to another thing that he said in this video. This is another thing he says about Karl Marx.
Marx spent his days in the reading room of the British Museum, researching and writing. Although he was obsessed with the term scientific, he was never able to marshal data to prove his theories. There's a good reason for this. There was no data to prove his theories. For all his time in the library, Marx couldn't find any evidence to suggest that capitalism, the free exchange of goods and services through privately owned business, was a passing phase.
No data. Has this man ever opened the book Capital? Has he ever opened it? I mean, the book is full of statistics from the British Museum, statistics about the production of cotton, the production of steel, the production, all kinds of economic statistics throughout the book. It's a dense text. I mean, has this man ever even opened it? To say that Marx never relied on any data, I mean, what a lunatic. I mean, how does this man get away with saying these kind of things? I don't know how he gets away with this. No data. Really, open the book Capital. It's available. You can get it at most bookstores, most libraries. Open the book Capital and see if it has no data in it. I challenge you. The book is full of statistics.
Since few people give up their liberties and property voluntarily, creating a Marxist state has always required guns, prisons, and summary executions. Marx's many disciples from Lenin on never considered this a problem.
Here we go again. Now, he insists that Marxists believe in violent revolution. Well, actually, if you'll look at how these Marxist revolutions have happened, it wasn't the Marxists who favored a violent revolution. For example, he talks about China, the Chinese Revolution. The communists wanted, at the end of the Second World War, to have a coalition government with the nationalists and the KMT and Chiang Kai-shek. They favored a coalition government. And the KMT, the Nationalist Party of China, which was aligned with the United States, would not allow the communists to participate in the elections. He says that communists don't believe that they can ever take power peacefully. In Chile, in 1973, Salvador Allende took power peacefully. He was elected. And the response was the CIA removing him. The United States backed Augusto Pinochet to be very, very violent. And the Venezuelan government, the Bolivarian government of Venezuela came to power peacefully. Chavez was elected in 1999, and he peacefully took power and in 2003 began moving the country towards socialism. In Bolivia, Evo Morales, the Marxist president, was elected peacefully. You know, actually reading the writings of Lenin, the writings of Stalin, the writings of, other leaders, you can see a strong critique of what they call left adventurism or punchism. Communists always favor peaceful means of taking power. However, the capitalists, in order to preserve their wealth, tend to be very, very violent and get rid of any democratic institution in order to preserve their power. So this notion that communists favor violence or violent revolution is simply false. If you look at it, in so many instances, you can see communists are the ones that are trying to peacefully transform the society, and then the capitalists are violent to them and they defend themselves. That's almost how every single revolution in the history of Marxism has gone down. Grove City College should be embarrassed to have this man as a professor. This man thinks nothing happened in relation to Marxism except intellectual circles discussed it between Marx's death in 1917. This man does not understand that vast living standard achievements took place in the Soviet Union, China, and other countries. This man does not understand that the Marxist movement has vastly debated and discussed the issue of rejecting left adventurism and punchism and favoring a peaceful transition to socialism. This man doesn't know any of that, and he calls himself a professor of political science. This man is teaching young people about Marxism when he has absolutely no understanding of Marxism himself. This man thinks that the book Capital does not have any statistics in it. Grove City College should be embarrassed to have this man on the faculty.
I mean, so that right there, right? That was a debunk of everything Paul Kanger had to say about Marxism. I mean, this guy knows absolutely nothing about what he's talking about. He is not aware that there was a vast Marxist movement in Europe prior to World War I. He has no idea that the Second International ever existed. He thinks that Marxism started in 1917, practically. He thinks that life got worse in China since 1949. He thinks life got worse in China in Russia since 1917. He has no notion that countries have been lifted out of poverty or industrialized with socialism. It's like that never occurs to him that there's ever been any industrialization or achievement under socialism. He says it never happened. He goes as far as trying to claim the book Capital has no data in it, which is ridiculous. I mean, the guy has no qualifications with which to speak about Marxism, right? And this is a big problem among conservatives, which is that, there are no Marxists in the room to actually argue with them, right? The only people nowadays to argue with them are woke liberals. And they want to tell you that woke liberals are Marxists. And a lot of confused woke liberals think they might be Marxists or something. And so, those arguments that he made against woke liberals are very effective arguments, because woke liberals are not going to defend the Soviet Union. Woke liberals don't know anything about labor unions. That's class reductionism, right? Oh, those labor unions they didn't mention transgender rights one time, So woke liberals can be very easily torn down by those arguments. But if you look at what the woke movement is doing and what this woke deconstruction stuff, and if you look at what the Soviet Union was, if you look at what China is doing today, you look at North Korea, you look at Venezuela and Nicaragua, you look at Cuba, you look at Vietnam, these countries have nothing in common with the woke left. Nothing, right? The woke left is all about tearing things down, rebellion, deconstruction. And these socialist countries are obsessed with growth and economic development, right? And these woke folks are all about, demoralizing people and pessimism. And the socialist countries are all obsessed with optimism and hope, etc. So these two things are completely different. And this is the common intellectual thing, is that wokeness is very obnoxious and very annoying. We've written a whole pamphlet, Do You Believe in Growth? We've written a whole pamphlet about it, debunking and showing how toxic the woke stuff is and why we oppose it. And it has absolutely nothing to do with what the socialist countries are doing. That said, woke people are genuinely annoying. And this is the trick that I'm seeing in intellectual circles, in right-wing spaces, right? Is they tap into people's very justified anger at woke people. And then they channel it into stupid anti-communism. Stupid anti-communism. Like Paul Kanger, who, just never noticed the Soviet Union becoming a superpower and defeating the Nazis, who just never noticed it. Gus, you should be embarrassed for your side, right? Your side doesn't know that Sputnik happened, right? Because socialism never achieved anything. Your side doesn't know that China is now a world superpower. Your side doesn't know that the Soviet Union became an industrial superpower that was making more steel than any other country in the world. Gus, aren't you embarrassed to have Paul Kanger on your side? Paul Kanger doesn't even know that the Second International exists. He doesn't know where the British Labour Party comes from. He claims to be a professor of political science, Gus. And he says nobody talked about Marxism until 1917. He doesn't know where the German Social Democratic Party came from. He doesn't know where the labor unions came from. He thinks that nothing happened with Marxism. This guy's a political science professor. He has no idea where half the political parties in Europe came from. Right? Gus, how are you not ashamed to be associated with this guy? Right? I'm sorry. If I called myself a professor of political science and I didn't know where the British Labour Party came from, and I didn't know where the German Social Democratic Party came from, I would be embarrassed. Gus, how are you not embarrassed to be associated with this man who doesn't know anything? Right? That's your side. That's the best they can put up. And that's who they're putting out there as their voice, is a guy who knows absolutely nothing, right? You should be very, very embarrassed, right? The Soviet Union in the 1930s was having a huge industrialization, the world's biggest power plants, the biggest steel mills in the world. But he says, no, life got worse, right? Never. The people in the Soviet Union didn't get running water and electricity for the first time. They didn't industrialize. They didn't get, they didn't get education. They didn't wipe out illiteracy. No, none of that ever happened. It made life worse. Gus, you got to be embarrassed. You got to be embarrassed, my friend, that's the best your side can put forward, right? You got to be embarrassed. Now, that said, right, this next video I'm going to show, which is very recent, it's Jordan Peterson talking with Paul Kanger. Paul Kanger apparently is a very religious person, and his focus is on Marx being a Satanist. Now, I'm going to start this video because this video, I'm not going to debunk it with the same kind of language I debunked the earlier video with, because he's pointing to something true and he's twisting it to say things that are not true, and that there's nuance. This next one I'm going to give more of a nuanced critique of. So let's do this next one, right? This is a video that Jordan Peterson just put out. Was Karl Marx a Satanist? Where he's interviewing that scholar of Marxism who I debunked before.
Know why he turned to atheism. These poems that he wrote that were pans to
let's get this first thing out of the way. Just before we even get going, right? Karl Marx was an atheist, no question about it. But was Karl Marx a Satanist? Well, not in the literal sense, because the Church of Satan believes in free market capitalism. Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, the founder of the religion that calls itself Satanism, believes in the writings of Ayn Rand. That is a fact. You Google the Church of Satan, you go read the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. They love free market capitalism. And that is one thing that evangelical Christian anti-communists always overlook. The open actual Satanists read the same books they read, right? I'm just telling you. Atlas Shrugged, she was an atheist. Ayn Rand was an atheist, and she was against religion because religion said that right and wrong exist. It called for people to be compassionate and kind to each other. And actual Satanists, like literal we love Satan people, they all promote Ayn Rand libertarian objectivism. So right there, the premise of the video, let's just acknowledge what's there. Actual open Satanists read the exact same economic literature that anti-communist evangelicals read. Atlas Shrugged, Ludwig von Mises, Milton Friedman, actual Satanists love capitalism and love the free market. And the Church of Satan is a pro-free market libertarian institution. That is a fact. So let's just get that out of the way, but let's continue.
Please. Is that after he becomes an atheist?
No, he's writing, so the first one was 1837, wrote another in 1841. He wrote a bunch of them.
Right.
He did just a chilling play called Ulanem.
Yes.
Oulanem. And people that are watching this, if they now type into their computer Ulanem, even in Google, it'll pop up. Play by Karl Marx.
Yeah.
It even has a Wikipedia entry.
Well, I looked at the Wikipedia page, actually, and you can pull up the Wikipedia page. Karl Marx only ever wrote the first act of the play. And he wrote the first act of a play when he was like a teenager. So, I mean, I pulled it up, actually. And, I mean, he never finished writing it, and it's just a play he started writing about someone wondering if they should destroy the world or something like that. So I Googled it, and I mean, he never finished the play. There you go.
And let me warn people, you might not want to do this, but if you click the images button, you will see, there's some satanic stuff up there from like, not heavy metal, but like black metal groups. So Ulanem is an anagram for Emmanuel.
Yeah, but what does that have to do with Karl Marx? Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure black metal wasn't around in the time that Karl Marx was around. Other people use the anagram, the same anagram he uses hundreds of years later for their rock and roll album because it's an anti-religious anagram. Like this is already very silly. And again, we could just make fun of this, but honestly, we should point out that he's kind of pointing to something true, but he's doing it in a way that is kind of pandering to people's ignorance. And he's pointing to something true in order to reinforce people's delusions and ignorance about these things. So let's let him continue. But like that, this is just a non sequitur. We all know Karl Marx was very anti-religious, and apparently this play that he wrote when he was a teenager, the name of it has been used by satanic rock bands in the 80s. Like, oh boy.
Or Manuelo.
Right.
So Marx takes Emmanuel, which is the name given to Christ, or Manuelo, and he flips it into this anagram called Ulanem. And it's this chilling play. The main character is Lucindo,
yep.
Lucindo. And you just can't believe what you're reading with this play. So that was written later in the 1840s. So really, the prime of his writing, including the decade when he wrote the Communist Manifesto, is also the same decade when he was writing these poems
and plays.
And throughout his life, his kids and others would say, he had a favorite line always from Mephistopheles. Everything that exists deserves to perish. So that
yes, everything that's history is constantly marching forward. That's what he was saying. All that is solid melts into air. Right? I mean, that's dialectics. That's Hegel. Right? All that exists contains the seeds of its own destruction. That's a key part of the Marxist philosophy. And it's also true. All things that exist will eventually pass away. The only things that are eternal, in my view, are spiritual, right? All material will eventually fade away and decay. Now, Marx believed that all that existed was material. He did not recognize any spiritual forces. But yeah, I mean, the idea that all that is material, all that is solid melts into air, and that's not a scandalous thing at all. I mean, that's pretty widely acknowledged. The material world that is around us will eventually go away. The earth will eventually not exist anymore. You will eventually die unless humanity overcomes immortality. Trees, there's a cycle of life. I mean, that's the dialectical philosophy, right? And the poet Goethe expressed it in the piece, Faust. And again, that's not scandalous at all, right? But again, you're supposed to be scared. So, and I don't even really want to defend Karl Marx on all of this, because Karl Marx was very anti-religious, and he's pointing to something true here, but he's doing it in a very juvenile way. He's just trying to scare conservatives who don't know anything about this, and he's trying to then equate it with woke leftism. And both of those things are dishonest.
The part of him throughout his life. His son, Edgar, has a letter where he addresses his father as "my dear devil," which I don't know. Maybe it's playful. I don't know.
Yeah.
Although I would never, call my dad "my dear devil." His wife called him "my wicked knave." I quote.
That sounds flirty to me. I'm just saying, right? My naughty boy, my wicked knave. I mean, this is silly.
Henrik Heinzen referring to him as a goblin who tried to take me under his spell.
Little known fact: the opening line of the Communist Manifesto is a specter is haunting Europe. But true story. You can Google this. This is actually true. True story. The actual first translation of the Communist Manifesto. The actual first translation was "a frightful hobgoblin is haunting Europe." That was the first translation, a frightful hobgoblin. A frightful hobgoblin. So there you go. So let's continue.
Cases of where he's using that kind of language. When Engels first met him, he describes him as this dark man from Trier.
Well, Karl Marx was literally a dark man. You do know that. He had very, very dark skin. His nickname was the Moor, right? He was a Sephardic Jew, and he looked like he was from North Africa. He had very dark skin. So when Engels called him a dark man, he was referring to the fact that Karl Marx's complexion was very dark.
Who hops and leaps and springs on his heels.
Doesn't sound like the devil. It sounds like an Easter bunny to me, right? He hops and springs on his heels. So he's a dark-skinned fellow who hops around. He's the Easter bunny. I mean, this is
monster of 10,000 devils. He describes him, and the letter from his father is. Which was written in 1837, a year before his father died. So his father writes to him, March 2nd, 1837. Carl, at times my heart delights in thinking of you and your fortune, and yet at times I cannot rid myself of ideas which arouse in me sad forebodings and fear when I am struck as if by lightning by the thought, is your heart in accord with your head, your talents? Has it room for the earthly but gentler sediments which in this vale of sorrow, it's a beautiful letter in many ways, are essentially consoling for a man of feeling? And then this question from the father of Karl Marx to his at this point, 18-year-old son. And since that heart, Carl, is obviously animated and governed by a demon, not granted to all men.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I've never had a demon inside of me. I've never had, mental health struggles. I've never had depression. I mean, this is, oh my God. I mean, there you go. I mean, no one watching this has ever wrestled with demons in their lives or had their parent say to them, I'm worried about the demons that you are wrestling with. I mean, this is so silly, right? And the thing is, I actually kind of want to defend Paul here because he's actually pointing to something true, but he's doing it in such a stupid way to appeal to stupid ideas that people already have. Like, he could actually teach his audience something good here, but instead he's pandering to stupidity, right? And I don't want to just completely rip Paul a new one here around this one because, he's anyway.
Is that demon heavenly or Faustian? Will you ever, and that is not the least painful doubt of my heart, will you ever be capable of truly human domestic happiness? Will
you ever be capable of happiness? Yes, right? He sees his son struggling with demons inside, emotional, yeah. I mean, this is,
and this doubt has no less tortured me since I have come to love a certain person like my own child.
Yes, his father loves him and says, you're very depressed. I see you wrestling with demons. You got him. I mean, you got him.
Will you ever be capable of imparting happiness to those immediately around you? By the way, the answer was no, right?
Well,
but that
obviously
phrase,
the father had intimations of that.
Yeah, and since that heart is obviously animated and governed by a demon not granted to all men, is that demon heavenly or Faustian?
Right,
That's his dad.
Yeah.
You got him. You got him, right? I mean, his dad wrote him a letter and said, I'm sorry you're struggling with depression, son. I care about you. You got him. You got him. I mean, he's literally Satan incarnated. I mean, he's a walking devil horn. Karl Marx probably had a tail, right, folks? He probably had horns and a tail. This is so stupid.
And there's only so many.
This is insulting to religious people, right? I am a religious person. I am deeply offended by this, right? I mean, this is why people think religious people are stupid, right? This is why they think religious people are stupid, right? I mean, this is literally like, oh my God. Marx probably breathed fire. This is so stupid.
Any of those things, I think that a sympathetic Marxist or Marxist biographer can shrug off. I mean, there's just so many statements like that from him and people about him and people who knew him and loved ones and a wife, a son, a best friend from Engels, and then the different writings. Whew.
Okay, so let's attack this.
His wife called him a naughty knave, a devilish knave. His dad wrote him a letter one time. He was a dark man because he had a dark complexion. He hopped around like the Easter Bunny. Oh, dear God.
Now, was he a Satanist, right?
Well,
actually, if he was a Satanist, he would believe in free market capitalism because that's what Anton LaVey believes in. All the actual Satanists believe in free market capitalism, as I said at the beginning of the video. So was he a Satanist? No, he was not, because the Church of Satan believes in free markets.
Well, that is a whole different thing that I can't.
Well, it's also the title of the video. It's a whole different thing. I mean, it's actually the title of the video. So,
personally answer.
Well, it seems not unreasonable to presuppose that he was a devotee of the Mephistophelian ethos.
Yeah, I think that's
right.
Well, what does that mean? Let's define ethos. Let's get the actual definition of ethos. Ethos, a characteristic spirit of a culture, era, or community. That's purely in the eye of the beholder, right? So if you don't like him, you could say he was part of a satanic spirit of a culture, era, or community. I mean, that's purely a subjective thing. That's not That's just in the eye of the beholder.
So the question is, what constitutes a Satanist? Well, someone who generates a murderous doctrine, that raises questions. I mean,
so what about the British Empire? Is that satanic? Right? The British Empire that killed millions of people, man-made famines in India, opium wars that destroyed China's economy and stopped them from developing and killed hundreds of millions of people, the famines in Ireland. I mean, the British Empire that ruled in the name of the Protestant Church of England, they created a murderous mass movement that murdered people in Asia, in the Caribbean, in Africa. I mean, nobody's killed more people than the British Empire, right? The British Empire that believed in free trade, the British Empire that believed in survival of the fittest and Darwinism, the British Empire that promoted Malthusianism and the idea of overpopulation, the British Empire that murdered millions of people all across the planet in order to enrich the bankers of London. There you go.
Dead serious about that.
Right.
The most murderous doctrine ever promoted in the roughly Judeo-Christian context by a large margin. So I would say it's incumbent on those who would defend him to describe why we wouldn't just assume that. But the part of the reason that I was so interested in talking to you was because I felt that what you documented in your book was extraordinarily telling from the psychological perspective, because I know how these things work. And it is not something that can be overlooked, that was his favorite quote.
Right.
I mean,
Yes, it is not to be overlooked that he thought all that existed was in the process of decaying, that the world was constantly changing, and that all that existed contains its seeds of destruction. There's a reason he loves that Goethe quote, and that's because it fits his philosophy perfectly. And if you knew anything about his philosophy, you would know that.
Especially not when you understand Goethe's centrality in the German intellectual tradition.
Yes, actually, if you understand it, it makes perfect sense. Goethe is one of the most beloved German poets, and he wrote a play. And in that play, the character of the devil that is tempting Faust, Dr. Faust, says a quote that matches Karl Marx's philosophy. And Karl Marx was very anti-religious. Karl Marx considered himself to be a rebel. He considered the church to be an oppressive institution. So he attached to the quote. I'm waiting for anything of substance here.
It's like having a favorite quote from Shakespeare, right? And it's not any old quote. It's
it's a quote that matches his philosophy. Karl Marx was an atheist, and Karl Marx also believed that history was constantly marching forward and that all that exists is constantly in a state of decay, that all that is solid melts into air. I mean, there's nothing here.
Central credo of Mephistopheles. So that's extraordinarily telling. Now, I do have another.
Can I give you a...
Yes.
So Robert Payne, the very serious academic, no right-winger, British man of letters, the guy who really broke this first in his 1968 biography of Marx, all right? His chapter where he talks about this stuff is called The Demons. And
let's look up Robert Payne, right? Let's look him up. Robert Payne, who wrote a 1968 biography of Karl Marx, right? Biography of Marx. Let's look him up. Robert Payne, right? 1968 biography of Marx. And who was Robert Payne? Who was he? So this is our source, right? Robert Payne, an English-born biographer. He also wrote novels, poetries, and magazines. Prolific and best known for his biographies of prominent people, including Leonardo da Vinci, Hitler, Stalin, Karl Marx, Lenin, Mao, Mahatma Gandhi, and all of which were selected by the Book of the Month Club. Okay, there we go, right? He's just a mainstream British writer, right? He was criticized because his biography of Hitler was seen as attempting to humanize Hitler. Interesting. Right. And he focused on Hitler's personal life. And before he became absorbed in politics, he was admired for his narrative and imaginative power. Payne was said to be a firm adherent of the conspiracy theory of politics. And among biographies of Lenin, Payne's book was described as the easiest to read and also the easiest to forget. you know, okay. I mean, this guy just sounds like a pretty mainstream British author.
Is Mark's biography. Now, he wrote this, and I'm not saying that I endorse this. As an academic, I can't say if this is correct.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't, because there's been all kinds of people that have written about his life, and this is like the most mainstream milquetoast biography ever written. But I mean, there we go. I bet. What did he say something good about devils? Did he disrespect the Bible or something? I mean,
There were times when Mark seemed to be possessed by demons. That's what Paine wrote. And
that doesn't seem literary at all, right? I'm sure that literally means anyway.
Now, this I would at least more endorse. Marx had the devil's view of the world and the devil's malignity. Sometimes he seemed to know that he was accomplishing works of evil. I think that gets closer to it. Now,
what were those works of evil? Would you mind sharing with us what those works of evil were?
Pastor Richard Wurmbrand, who wrote the famous book Tortured for Christ, and was tortured for Christ in Romanian prisons by...
Oh, there's an objective source right there. Somebody who was arrested in Romania, tortured, and came to a Western country. That's an objective view of Marxism right there. You're going to get a totally objective view from someone who's been traumatized by torture. They're going to give you an objective view of Marxism.
Communist captors who were shouting, "I am the devil," while they were torturing him. He did a book called Marx and Satan. He's
totally objective, I'm sure, right? Not influenced by this man's personal experience and the horrors that he went through. You know, I'm sure it's just a purely objective source.
Convinced that Marx was a Satanist and did some things ritualistically that it might have even been satanic. But I can't say that. I can't endorse that.
But you see evidence of that in his play.
I've never seen...
In terms of at least his fantasies.
That's right. That's right. In fact, Paine even goes so far as to say, Vladimir Lenin, right? There's a statement from Lenin which said, when I was a teen, I broke from all religion. I took the cross from my neck and I threw it in the rubbish bin. And Paine has a quote where, not Paine, Richard Wurmbrand, where I think he believes that Lenin even stomped on it.
Wait a second. So you're saying there's a quote that says he took off his cross and threw it in the garbage, and somebody else says he thinks that Karl Marx or that Lenin stomped on it, and that
says, well, that's a satanic ritual. I don't know that it is.
That is a satanic. Like, you want to talk about like how ridiculously stupid this is? So Lenin, who was an atheist, decides he's an atheist. He takes his cross off and he says he threw it in the garbage. Somebody else who's very biased says he stomped on it. And somebody else says that is a ritual in some satanic something. Like, is there anything remotely political about this? I mean, this sounds like, Cloak and Dagger this sounds like he's trying to write a horror movie here or something. Like, this is the dumbest thing I have.
Or not. But there's another case of Lenin who at least did the work of the devil. I mean, Lenin had, according to Robert Conquest, W.H. Chamberlain, the first historian of the Russian Revolution, 500,000 people were killed from 1917 to 1923 under Lenin, not even including the Russian Civil War.
Yeah, well, I mean, the British Empire, again, did the work of the devil. I mean, how many people did they kill? I mean, it's just like, this is just so he's like making a religious case. I mean, this is very silly.
That's not the devil's work. I don't know what the hell it is, right?
I mean, and how many people were killed by anti-communist dictators around the world? I mean, 500,000 people were slaughtered in 1965 in Indonesia when the CIA overthrew the government and installed fanatical anti-communists, and they turned into a genocide against ethnically Chinese people. I mean, even now, the Nazis in Ukraine are burning down World War II memorials. There was the massacre in that trade union house. I mean, I'm waiting for like anything here that is of any substance.
But I think what Paine said in the latter quote, the devil's view of the world, the devil's malignity, and at the very least, this identification with kind of devilish like destruction, right? Tearing everything down, rebelling against the world, everything that exists deserves to perish.
Now we're getting to a legitimate point. Amid all of the silliness, we finally have gotten to a somewhat legitimate point. Okay, right? He's getting to something here, right?
That at least. And then the ideology that he created that just happened to be responsible for the deaths of over 100 million people in the 20th century.
No, where do those numbers come from, right? Those numbers come from famines. And it was the communists who cured the famines, because famines were going on in these countries all the time before the communists came on. Until the communists came along, they didn't have industrial they didn't have mechanized agriculture. They didn't have tractors in the Soviet Union until the communists came along. Till the communists came along, China didn't have electricity. It was the communists who cured the famines. And those big, huge numbers you hear are from famines, which happened all the time before the communists came in, and the communists cured them. So saying that, oh, well, these communists killed 100 gajillion good million people, those numbers come from famines, and those famines happened before the communists, and the communists cured them. That would be like saying that, the doctor who cures the cancer is responsible for the cancer. Those numbers don't mean jack shit. Okay. Those huge numbers, they come from something that the communists cured, right? And this is what they always do, right? There were famines all the time in China before the Chinese Communist Party came in. But yes, under their leadership in the early 60s, there was a horrendous famine. And after that, there weren't any, right? There were famines all the time before the communists came into the Soviet Union. In the early 1930s, there was a very bad famine in Ukraine. And then there wasn't any after that. I mean, it's the communists build a modern country. They build a modern food system. They bring tractors to the countryside. They bring electricity. And somehow something that happened under the old system all the time is their fault and is intentional murder. I mean, we've heard this all before.
More than World War I and World War II combined. So that ideology was pretty hellacious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to say the least.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not like millions and millions of people haven't been killed by free trade and capitalism. Millions of people didn't die in the transatlantic slave trade. Millions weren't killed in Vietnam. Millions weren't killed in Korea. Millions weren't killed in country after country after country where the U.S. imperialists have destroyed it. How many? I mean, this is just standard.
Okay, so, and I think it's very naive not to assume that the events that we described in Marx's life are not connected, right?
Yeah,
right.
Correct.
And that his economic polemics were somehow independent of his poetic imagination.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, obviously they weren't, because they wouldn't have had that motivational force.
Mm-hmm.
So they were calling on dark forces, obviously.
No. Marxism originated as a movement in the aftermath of the revolutions to overturn feudalism and bring capitalism into the world. And feudalism was a society where the church and the state were the same institution. And the French Revolution in particular was very anti-religious, because religion, the church, had been the mechanism through which the feudal aristocracy had ruled. And out of the French Revolution, which was very anti-religious, which destroyed all the churches, the cult of the supreme being, executed priests, etc., they saw that they did not create the egalitarian society they were hoping to build. The revolutions to overturn feudal relations, the 1848 revolutions throughout Europe, they did not result in the creation of a society that was truly egalitarian. They didn't see the liberté, égalité, fraternité. And that the French Revolution and the revolutions to overturn feudalism largely tapped into people's desire for rebellion, libidinal release, right? The unleashing people's anger and rage, the rage of the peasantry, unleashing people's sexual desires. That was very much what the French Revolution and the revolutionary intelligentsia and the revolutionary movements of Europe, of which Marxism started, was attached to. And that aesthetic is largely what the communist countries of the world have moved away from. Communist countries around the world promote traditional family values now. And that aesthetic is also largely what the Western left is promoting. The color revolutions that are happening all across Europe, and George Soros and the State Department, the people trying to overthrow Maduro in Venezuela, they all wear Guy Fawkes masks. They all, are pumped up about rebellion. It is the West that has hijacked the aesthetic, the dark forces that you're talking about. Yes, Marx absolutely was part of the revolutionary intelligentsia in Europe that had that anti-religious spirit of rebellion and passion. that was about destruction, that was about unleashing people's impulses. And the communist countries of the world have largely broken with that. And the Western capitalist countries are now using that aesthetic to destabilize the world.
So, because otherwise they wouldn't have compelled people in that manner, especially not toward that sort of immense sadistic murderousness and utter destructiveness.
Yeah, utter destruction. China becoming a superpower, right? The Soviet Union inventing space travel and raising all these people up out of poverty. Yeah, how could anyone go along with that, right? Why would people why would peasants that are semi-slaves want to have their own land? I mean, it's like, this is just so, you have to know nothing, right? You have to have never heard the other side of the story to even entertain this. First, he's giving us a Hollywood horror movie about, devils and Mephistopheles and horns and tails and a dark man. And next, I mean, this is just so silly.
And of course, get to the hatred of God, which all the communists did. So
Actually, no, they don't. The president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, is a Roman Catholic. The president of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, is also a Roman Catholic. The head of the Communist Party of Russia, Gennady Zhuganov, is an Orthodox Christian. This is just silliness.
Communists thereafter seek to ban religion.
Right. Atheists.
That's
They're
right.
not exactly atheists because they're trying to stomp something out.
That's right. It's not a
neutrality.
That's right. It's not a neutrality toward religion. It's not irreligion. It's not separation of church and state. It is militant, aggressive atheism. Trotsky and Lenin create the League of the Militant Godless.
And Stalin brought back the Russian Orthodox Church. And Trotsky is the one that the Western liberals liked. And in fact, Trotskyite groups have been funded by the CIA all over the world to work against communist governments, right? In fact, many of the neoconservatives in the Bush administration were themselves former Trotskyists, right? I mean, so I'm not following this at all, right? In Russia today, Stalin is wildly loved. Stalin, who brought back the Russian Orthodox Church, and Trotskyists are the people running our country over here. So, I'm not following you.
Right.
They ban religion. They have the Moscow church trials. They blow up churches. They jail priests, right? The Solzhenitsyn writes in the Gulag Archipelago, they put nuns in special sections of the Gulag with prostitutes.
Yes, right.
Deem them whores to Christ.
Absolutely.
Lenin said, all worship of a divinity is a necrophilia. There is nothing more abominable than religion.
Yeah.
So they don't just try to stop religion. They want Pol Pot, the Buddhist monks in Cambodia, to renounce their...
Pol Pot was funded by the CIA. That's a fact. Google, CIA funded Pol Pot. Pol Pot was funded by the United States to fight against Vietnam, which was aligned with the Soviet Union.
Vows to marry. It's not enough for them to be quiet. And so after 4 years...
I don't know how you can separate a militantly anti-religious atheism from especially, say, within a Christian context, from something approximating satanic ideology. Because
satanic ideology believes in free market capitalism.
Right.
I don't see how conceptually that separation is possible. It's one thing to be atheist in the manner that leaves people to go to hell in a handbasket in their own way, but to be actually an enemy of the religious enterprise, that's a whole different thing.
It is.
Well, if you lived in a feudal society where if you so much as uttered one word in criticism of the church, you'd be burned at the stake, right? If you starved and the church told you that, oh, well, you have to give your food away to the landlord because he has the divine right to rule over you. If you, I can think of situations in a feudal society in which one would develop a burning hatred for the church as an institution, because you have to admit that the church-led society of medieval Europe was a very oppressive one, in which the church was giving credence to the brutal oppression of some by others, right? Obviously, I don't think that was an accurate representation of Christianity and what it was about. I think that the church was an idol, and that idol needed to be torn down. But I mean, I can think of people who are oppressed, people that are enslaved, and told that, oh, well, you deserve to be a slave because the church says so. I can imagine them being very hatred. Why can't he ever imagine this situation? I'm curious why Jordan Peterson is so historically illiterate. He can't imagine why people that are enslaved in the name of religion might hate religion. Why people who are oppressed by landowners in the name of religion might hate religion. Why people who are living under a tyrannical king who they're told has divine right to rule over them by God might come to hate religion. If you look at what feudal society was and what feudalism is, you can understand why people that are rebelling against feudalism might also develop a strong hatred for the institution that justifies feudalism, which was the church, right? And I don't feel that feudal church, the feudal system, is an accurate representation of what Jesus wanted, or is an accurate representation of God on earth. But if religion was presented as the church holding up the king's divine right to rule over the people, and the church was presented as upholding the right of slave owners to own slaves and the right of landowners to oppress peasants, I can understand why somebody might get mad about it. Why is this great psychologist, Jordan Peterson, incapable of understanding that? If religion is equated with oppressive human institutions that rule in the name of God, you can understand why people might develop a resentment and hostility toward religion. It's not that hard to understand, Jordan. You're like, oh, why would this ever happen? I think I can understand why that might happen, right? I mean, if the only communists I'd ever met were people that were oppressing me, I might hate communism. Would that make sense? Of course. So, I mean, I don't understand why he's saying, oh, I don't understand. I can understand it, right? If you had grown up in a feudal society in which you had been told that you're an inferior person, that you're a second-class citizen, that you have natural superiors who rule over you, and this was all sanctified in the name of religion, you'd be mad about that. In England, Oliver Cromwell cut off the head of Charles I, the King of England, for saying that. He called it a heresy, right? In England, the Puritans revolted, and they had the English Civil War. In France, it was atheistic, but you can understand that. You can understand why people would resent religion under such circumstances. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I don't know why he's playing dumb here. This whole thing is just
so. And that obviously Marx and the communists were obviously that, clearly, obviously.
And Satan might say, I don't care if you believe in me or not. You're doing my work, man. You're shutting down churches, blowing up churches.
That also touches on the issue of what it means to believe, right? And I mean,
blowing up churches like the Wahhabis that were funded by the U.S. government in Syria to murder Christians, blowing up churches like the U.S. NATO bombs did in Serbia when they bombed and destroyed Serbia, blowing up church. I mean, there's been plenty examples of persecution of Christians at the hands of the United States and its allies around the world. Plenty of examples of that. And right now, all over Ukraine, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is being brutally oppressed, by the U.S.-backed regime. Priests are getting arrested. Church property is being seized. They're accusing the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of being a front for Russia, and they're persecuting priests. So again, what ideology is this being done in the name of? Western liberal democracy.
You could imagine someone comparatively harmless who toys with ritualistic satanic activities in a sort of dramatic manner. Mm-hmm. And then you could imagine someone who tortures nuns and priests and burns down churches, but forgoes any technical affiliation with Satan.
Right.
I would say that the latter is the Satanist in a much deeper sense than the former.
That's
Not
right.
that what the former is doing is excusable.
Yeah, or at least satanic.
Yes, right. But to do what the communists did to the religious enterprise is evidence of something far more militant than a mere atheism.
Yeah, they live in a bubble, and there is absolutely nothing in this that, if you are not already a religious anti-communist, is going to persuade you, right? And it is just pandering to people's ignorance, telling people a fairy tale story of Karl Marx, the dark man who hopped around and had horns on his head. I mean, I'm embarrassed. I'm honestly embarrassed for this man, right? I mean, you know, I'm honestly embarrassed. Now, he was trying, the grain of truth in what he was saying is what we've talked about. We are city builders. We talk about city builders and vandals and how the vandal tendency, right, has emerged within the Marxist current, right? And that Trotskyism and nowadays the synthetic left takes the very evil, destructive side, the rebellious aspects of Marxism, and codifies them into a vehicle for destabilizing countries around the world. And the Marxism that they teach on college campuses, that is more about Judith Butler and Susan Sontag, that stuff is very destructive, and it is focused on tearing things down. It is focused on libidinal release, and it is totally opposed to all the socialist governments, right? Trotsky was for permanent revolution. Stalin was for socialism in one country, right? And the Marxism that is the vulgar, rebellious, anti-religious, destructive, tear it down, burn it down Marxism is the Marxism that is funded by the American government. And the Marxism that they practice in China and Cuba and Venezuela and North Korea, etc., is the Marxism that the US government is trying to destroy. And it is all about building and constructing. And it's also coming to terms with and making peace with religion, largely, especially in Latin America and many other places. So this whole thing is just, I'm embarrassed for that whole segment. It was painful. It was very, very painful. The city building tendency versus the vandal tendency. Exactly. I mean, and it's like, I mean, the attempt to equate wokeism with what goes on in China. You think they're woke in China? I mean, you think that, I mean, it's like, how can they say this? This is such intellectual dishonesty, right? You think that's what they're doing in China? They're firing professors because they don't say transgender loud enough. I mean, you think that's what they're doing in China? You think, you read Mao's writings. He's talking about how, white privilege, white people have it too good. And we need to punish them for being, I mean, that's not, it's just infuriating. It's really, really infuriating to see this stupid discourse around communism, where we have the woke left who think, a lot of them think that they're communists, and they don't know anything about imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. They don't know anything about overproduction, the tendency of the falling rate of profit. They don't know anything about Marxism, right? And they're talking around as if they're Marxists. They hate all the actual Marxist governments on the one hand, and then we got the right wing that agrees with them. Oh yeah, they are Marxists. And it's like, there's no one talking about how we can organize the economy to raise living standards for the people, to get out of the disaster that we are in as a country right now. No one's talking about how we can organize the economy to make a better life for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need the banks and the factories and the industries and the centers of economic power to be organized to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few. We need an economy that works in the interests of all humanity, not a small group of billionaires and bankers, right? We need an economy where growth is uninterrupted by the irrationality of the market. We need to raise up and build a better life for working families. That's what we need. And that requires rational control and planning of our economy, control the means of production. And that's what Marxism is about. And, these people that are waging a culture war that are very satanic, that are just trying to rebel and want to destroy and all of that. And these people that are conservative and are repulsed by them, but then defend free market individualism and the rule of profits. And I mean, both sides miss the point. Both sides just completely miss the point. And I find the whole thing to be very, very frustrating. It's very, very frustrating to watch. So that is my reaction to that absolute silliness that we just saw from Paul Kanger right there. I have debunked Paul Kanger before, and I just debunked him once again. So, yeah, and again, the naysaying, right? Did I say racism doesn't exist? Is that what I said, Chris? You know, this is how these kind of people argue, right? They always want you to be wrong. Chris, I'm on here defending an ideology you believe in, right? Against somebody who's bashing it, Jordan Peterson. And rather than seeing the value in what I'm doing, you just tried to twist my words into somehow saying that I denied that racism exists in America and the Caribbean and Latin America. When did I ever do that? I want everyone to see this, because this is how Party of Socialism and Liberation people are. They don't want you to be right. They want you to be wrong so they can feel good about themselves, right? Chris, if you were a genuine person who was genuinely interested in Marxism, you would appreciate everything I just said there. But instead, you listened very carefully until I said one thing that you could possibly twist into something so that you can feel good about yourself. You are a great example of a woke person, Chris. You're perfect. You should go get a job at the People's Forum. Brian Becker and PSL would probably pay you $20, $30 an hour to be a piece of shit like this. You are a great example of what a woke leftist is all about, right? I always acknowledge that racism exists, right? I'm on here talking about the millions of people the British Empire killed, right? I never said that racism doesn't exist, but this is how woke people operate. Chris, you don't want to get along with me, right? You're on here looking for a way that I can be wrong so that you can get points for tattling on me, right? We don't need you here, Chris, right? Be gone, right? And this is what I'm talking about, right? I'm on here every night talking about the Uhuru movement and why we support them, right? While PSL is trying to get their rallies canceled, right? I'm on here showing films about the Uhuru movement. I'm on here doing everything we can for them, right? But you're on here. You want to find some way I can be wrong so you can feel good about yourself. Well, Chris, I hope you feel good about yourself. I really hope you feel good about yourself, because that's all you're accomplishing. We're trying to build a real movement here to stop the low-wage police state, to change society. And you're on here trying to find a way I can be wrong so you can feel good about yourself. Caleb, do you condemn racism? Yes, I do condemn racism. Don't you love this? This is exactly what woke people are about. Thank you, Chris, for saying that. Right? Thank you so much, Chris, for you are a poster child of exactly what is wrong. And this is why most Americans hate communists, because they think communists are like that. You're racist, Mom and Dad. Oh, you just said racism is not real. I'm going to tell on you. I'm going to denounce you on Facebook. Mom and Dad, I denounce and disavow my uncle. He said that racism is not real, and it is real. I got an A+ at my school for learning about race studies. Shut up. Everyone is sick of you people. Everyone is tired of people like you, Chris. The whole country is goddamn tired of you, right? Good job, Chris. The whole country is tired of people like you, right? If you think that I need to acknowledge racism more, there's a way to say that. There's a way to bring it up, right? But that's not what you want to do, because that would help me learn. If you think I can be more sensitive around issues, there's ways of saying it, Chris. But you're not trying to do that. You want to point at me and get attention for yourself by making me wrong. You don't want me to do better, right? You don't have an honest critique of what I'm saying. You just want to get points for yelling at me for being wrong. So literally, you've been watching me this entire night and you've said almost nothing. But then you found one little thing. Where'd you go, Chris? I haven't banned you yet. I was gonna ban you later. I'm critiquing. I just spent an hour critiquing Jordan Peterson, and you said nothing because you agreed. Oh, damn it, he's saying good things again. Oh, darn. And this is how PSL people are. This is exactly how the Brian Becker crowd are, right? You should go and see if they will pay you money to go work at the People's Forum. Right? Maybe they'll pay you to put on a orange vest and push people around at Palestine rallies. Right? You are going out of your way to make me wrong, to make other people in your life wrong so that you can feel good about yourself. Right? You are a great example of why Americans are going to vote for Trump this fall, because they're tired of people like you. Right? If you want to make people better, you should argue with them in a way that wins them to their position. You shouldn't accuse them, right? And this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? This is exactly what I'm talking about, right? This is weird. This has turned into me yelling at people in my chat. First, I was yelling at that anti-communist guy, Gus, and now I'm yelling at Chris. Chris, look, I'm tempted to block you, but I'm not going to, Chris. I want you to stick around, but I want everyone to see what Chris just did there, right? Right? He went out of his way to try and make me wrong so he could get some SJW points. And I mean, that nobody likes somebody who does that. I just got to tell you, Chris, right? It might get you points in the political group you're in. It might make you look good to somebody, but nobody likes people like that. Nobody likes it. You're loving it. Hey, maybe I should do this more often. Maybe I should yell at my chat more often. You're supposed to ignore annoying people in the chat, but sometimes it's been a long day. It's been a good day, though. It's been a long day, but a good day. Had a good chat with a comrade this afternoon. You know, been going different places, doing different things. And yeah, you know, you can't do enough in a day. Let me just put it that way. You can't do enough in a day. You can't do enough in a day. But anyway, folks, the way these live streams work is that I give my opening remarks. Yeah, don't tempt me. Don't tempt me, Omar. I give my opening remarks and then I do a roll call. And then from there, I answer people's super chat questions. But no one sent any super chats yet. So I don't have any super chats to answer. So if people have got things they want to ask me about, by all means, send them my way. But I mean, if we did the roll call now, it would be pretty short because no one's asked me about anything yet. But I've got other things we can talk about on here. I've got other things we can talk about. There are other things we can react to. There are other things we can do. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. So yeah, that was me reacting to the Jordan Peterson, Satan, whatever video. But yeah, there you go. There we go. But yeah, I mean, the problem with that video is that, I mean, he's pointing to a true thing, right? That Marxism was formed in the bourgeois revolution and that it had this spirit of rebellion in it. And that the socialist countries have largely tried to get away from that spirit of rebellion because it is very toxic and destructive. He was pointing to something true, but he was using it and he's not acknowledging the way the communist countries are now. And he's kind of tapping into people's anger at woke people. So, Satan told me not to clean my room. There you go. There you go. There you go. But yeah, I've got some other material I can react to on here. I mean, the night is young, as they say, and I am a little more tired than I usually am. But I'm glad you all are here. I'm glad someone suggested that I react to that video by Jordan Peterson. It certainly, what did I just do? Okay. It certainly was entertaining. But yeah, let me see what else I've got here for you all. Right. But if anyone has any super chats for the second half of the show, those would be appreciated because then I'll have something to talk about in the second half of our show. We've been going for some time here, but let's see what else I've got in the docket to react to. Let's see what else we've got here. Right. Well, speaking of arguing with people about Marxism, you all know that I've been talking about Jordan Peterson. I'm sorry. I've been talking about Destiny, right? Destiny Stephen Bennell, and how he's been, saying different things. My debate with Destiny Stephen Bennell was pretty epic. This is a moment from that debate that I think was, I mean, again, when people try to pull this, socialism, no one ever invents anything. Here we go.
Bad things have happened in socialist countries, bad things have happened in capitalist countries, but blaming every bad thing in the Soviet Union on socialism. And then whenever it happens in capitalism, saying, but that's it happened because of there's a bad leader or something like that. Well, no, I just, the way that these things are discussed, I don't know any person who would deny that these bad things have happened. Maybe they would disagree about the details about some of them, but I'm not here to do that. But I don't know anyone who would deny that these things have happened. But the notion that it's always because of socialism, if it happens in a socialist country, and if it happens under capitalism, well, it's because it's not true capitalism. Or you've had these arguments, right? Problems in capitalism.
Yeah, but like
are
the
not
difference
because of
isn't like
capitalism. Every death in the Soviet Union from the time of 1917 to 1991 was purely caused by Stalin and communism. That narrative is inconsistent.
the difference is we have to be a little bit more honest when we look at why certain people die or why certain things happen under economic systems. So in the United States, when somebody goes to the hospital and they can't afford to get some test to screen for cancer, and then they later die of it because they didn't catch it early enough, this is a failure of capitalism. We have the resources. They're literally right there and the person can't access it, okay? That is 100% a failure of capitalism. When you have a people who are told to stop farming and then food isn't rationed to them and all of their crops are requisitioned by the central government as a part of central planning, and then those people starve, 3.5 to 7.5 million of them, that is a failure of central planning, of socialism or communism. Do you agree, or do you think that these two things are fundamentally different?
I would agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I would also agree that when Soviet agriculture was mechanized and got tractors and industrialized, and its successes were also a success of central planning. But yeah, when it failed and when it had problems, that was a failure of central planning. I know many people are critical of the agricultural policies. In the 1920s, during the new economic policy, the Soviet government was pushing peasant enrich yourself and was promoting private farming. Then later, they rapidly collectivized, very, very rapidly, and promoted collective farming. And it was a zigzag that was very dramatic. And I've heard very strong criticisms of that. I'm not an expert. I'm not a Soviet historian.
If you want to take credit for stuff like that, sure.
Planning,
if that's how we're going to play that like the development of that country, like then I'm going to say that all of that agricultural development that took place in the USSR, that was actually a success of capitalism because the tractor was invented in America in the late 1800s. So actually, all the tractors that the USSR.
I read to you earlier about how the Soviet Union was producing more tractors than the United States at that point in their state-run factories. So
sure, but it was off of a U.S. invention, off of a capitalist country's invention.
Okay, okay. So now, if a system invents something, that's an argument in its favor. Where was the first cell phone invented?
I don't know. Let's check.
1957 in the Soviet Union.
Using like satellite technology and everything that we have today?
No, the first mobile phone ever created was in 1957 by Soviet engineer Leonid Ivanovich Kaprianovich.
So so I could be wrong here, but
Who invented the AK-47 rifle, the most efficient weapon, the most efficient gun, I should say, right?
It's efficient, not about killing people. There's a reason why we don't use AK-47s today.
Yeah, because the M16s break, and then we can sell more. It's the military-industrial complex. The AK-47 is a much more efficient weapon.
Well, because the caliber is more lethal as well. 5.56 is superior to the 7.62, the battle rifle rounds or whatever.
They break. They're not durable. You can run over an AK with a tank and it still works. And
I don't think that most rifles need to be field tested to be ran over by tanks.
Let's not get caught up in the gun debate because this can go too many different ways.
Okay.
Yeah, like we could argue like about
Like the Soviet Union even had a home computer system in 1985. Now the USA already had a home computer system, but they developed their own without technology, with a treaty, the NATO treaty, barring them from getting any technology from the West. I mean, the notion that central planning economies can't create inventions, can't advance technology is false.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that these types of innovations can come from a lot of different places, sure. It's very strange how we decide like what we take credit for versus what we give, like what we don't take credit for. I don't know. It just feels all over the place to me.
Atrocities here.
Okay. I have to get a super chat question in here unless you guys want to keep going back and forth on that. So this is for Destiny.
Also, wait, real quick, just on the
go ahead.
Part of that. Apparently, in 1949, AT&T was the first company to commercialize like mobile telephone services. I don't know, like where the idea, who in the USSR did they do this earlier, or?
I've seen it cited many places that in 1957, the Soviet engineer Leonid Ivanovich Kaprianovich invented the first mobile phone. I've seen that many places. You're disputing that. I mean, I can see it disputed. It's been disputed. I mean, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. But that goes, we're always told that under socialism, no one ever invents anything because the only reason people invent things is because of capitalism and all of that. And I think that spits in the face of that. And there's many Soviet inventions. I believe LED lights were also invented in the Soviet Union.
Okay. Destiny, anything?
Let's do the super chat question.
Yeah.
We're going almost 2 hours now, so I think I got to wrap.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I completely wiped the floor with Destiny. It was one of my better debates. But hey, since we're just kind of, and I do appreciate the super chat, Gleb, you'll be the first one I answer in the second half. But hey, I recently got to visit the Russian or the United Nations for the Day of the Russian Language. So I thought I might put that on. This was the Day of the Russian Language that I got to visit at the United Nations. Marked the beginning of a week of activities to commemorate and lead up to the Day of the Russian Language that marks the birthday of Russian poet and writer Alexander Pushkin. And as you can see, there were displays of Pushkin's poetry, Pushkin's fairy tales. We also had performances by children. There was music. It was an all-out celebration of Russian culture and the Russian language at the United Nations headquarters.
Russian delegation has always supported multilingualism and the role of Russian language, who's helping a number of delegations to communicate with each other. Russian language used to be subject to some attacks, and it was always protected. Unfortunately, we have to protect it today as well, although we live in so-called civilized world.
We had an opportunity to speak with some of the guests about how they felt about the Russian language and Russian culture and why it is that at this time in particular, it's important to highlight Russia's vibrant history as a civilization. Here's what they had to say.
It's very important to split the politics from like the real life, the languages. I mean, it's a language, it's a life, so we should not really mix language with politics and stuff. And even like, the people, we should not really mix politics with everything. Politics is something different, so we should really, and the language actually puts you much closer to the people. I think language is very important because it puts people much closer to each other. That's my opinion.
I'm from the United Kingdom, I'm British, and I think events like this calls for diversity and inclusion. The fact that I'm here and to learn more about Russia, to see the other side of Russia, the Russian Federation. Spasibo.
All right, thank you.
Russian culture, the literature, the music, the art is phenomenally rich and inspiring and glorious. And we are being deprived of it in this country now.
Now, as you can see, this is a very elaborate display about Russian fairy tales, Russian art, Russian poetry, the Russian language, and the importance of Russia's history as a vibrant civilization with a beautiful culture that goes back hundreds and thousands of years. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York. All right. That was my report on the Day of the Russian Language at the United Nations. I see we've got a few super chats I can answer. So why don't we do our roll call, and then I'll start answering people's super chats. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Who is with us here tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us here tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? Who is with us? Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. We got Mark Works in Ottawa. Mark Jones in Utica, New York. Usually you're first, Mark, but Mark Works beat you. Smitty in Chicago. Welcome, Smitty. Omar in Toronto. Dustin Schlesinger in Cleveland, Ohio. Blake in Alabama. Balthazar in Oakland. Catherine the Great agrees. Nate in Chicago. Orlando, Florida. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Brooklyn. Alex in Brazil. Ottawa, Ontario. Jenny in Cincinnati, Drew in Auckland, New Zealand. Hey, Chris, it's all good. It's all good. China seasoned noob, Dan Niswander from the Los Angeles area. Good to meet you, Dan. I'm looking forward to seeing our podcast we recorded. Patrick in Maine, Russia, a country, a lot of great people. Catalonia, Junior in South Florida, April and Chris in Salt Lake City, George from Detroit, Ty Blee in Pennsylvania, right? Colin in Greensboro, April and Chris from Salt Lake City, Nasser in Los Angeles. I kind of overreacted, Chris. I apologize, but let's just try to be constructive here. Let's all be on the same team. Sydney and Frankie Stevens, welcome, welcome, welcome. Names and locations, names and locations. E from Occupied, California. Yes, Denver. I'm sure Chris is a good dude. I'm sure he's a good dude too. I'm sure he's a good dude too, right? Very good. Good to have you here, Chris. We love you. All right, Nick in Michigan. Nick in Michigan. North Carolina. Briggy in Pennsylvania. Briggy in Pennsylvania. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Glad you are still with us, Chris. Good to have you. All righty. Names and locations. Oh, Philip, hi. Philip, hi is here. Wow, Philip, we've all been praying for you in our community. You're home from the hospital. It's so good to hear from you. Big up for Caleb for your tolerance. John McCarthy in Chicago. We love you, John. You're doing great work. Everyone, give your prayers to Philip High, just out of the hospital. So glad you're with us, Phil. I'm so glad to see your name in the chat. You made my night. All right. All right. And I do apologize to Chris. You're right. Chris, I appreciate you realizing that it came out the wrong way, but I'm sure you're on our team. So maybe I flipped out there. Patch in Arizona. Chad from Spokane. Prayers to Philip. Glad to hear that. Get well, Philip. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Yes. Yes. Let's think about Gabby. Gabby is in our community. We're thinking about Gabby these days. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? It's a problem that that people come here sometimes to see me get performatively angry. That can be a problem, right? I can get performatively angry because that's what the crowd, the audience wants to see. And sometimes that's not good. Alex Rickel in Oregon, right? Right. You don't want to be, you all love to see me get angry and yell about imperialism, etc. But sometimes, right? Sometimes it can, isn't there like a country song? You're walking on the fighting side of me, right? Right. And that Merrill Haggard, I think. But anyway, it's been a wild day. I'm a little tired. I'll be honest with you all. I'm a little tired tonight, but that's okay. That's okay. It's a lovely summer. It's nice weather here in New York City. And so there we go. There we go. Right. All righty. Anybody else? Names and locations. Funky is laughing. That's good. I'm glad you're laughing, Funky. I'm glad you're laughing. Right? See, I knew it. You all love it. You all love it. You love it. You love the fight inside, don't you? Right? We all have to get robustly angry. Yes, yes. Angry Caleb for the win. You all love it. You all love it. Yes, you do. That's why we're here, Chris. So you helped us. You made some entertainment for everybody, Chris. And hey, whatever. Oh. But I think we've all been there, right, Chris? Whether you meant it that way or not, we've all been there. We've all dealt with the person who purposely takes our words out of context. And right, it just, it's just something that we've all been there before. I think there's a lot of people here who maybe you didn't mean it that way, but could sympathize with the anger. Reminds me of Scott Ritter, who swears like a sailor every time he looks at the chats. That's funny. I remember one of his recent streams, Scott was apologizing. So can you feel the love, people? Yes, we can. All righty. David North complaining about being called a Putin puppet. Oh my goodness. David North, a real life Bond villain. Oh, I'll tell you all about it when I get to that in the super chats. That'll be fun. I've met David North. I have met David North. I have met David North. I like a book that David North published. I would recommend it. It's called The Carrollton 12. I'll just answer this one now, just so we get to it, since I'm thinking about it. So I met David North. David North, he came to the RT office to be interviewed by Chris Hedges. Before he and Chris Hedges had their falling out. He and Chris Hedges were close. They were friendly. He went on Chris Hedges' show, but then they had a disagreement. And then when the Rage Against the War Machine rally happened, David North just was so angry and denounced the Rage Against the War Machine rally, denounced Jimmy Dore and all of this. And, so now David North just absolutely hates Jimmy Dore and Chris Hedges and all those people. And he's written, he's given CPI some honorable mentions a couple times. He's written some hate articles about us, or he's dropped a paragraph against us. So David North, right? David North, he is the head of the World Socialist website, which is a communist website. And then they have their own group. They're a Trotskyite group called the Socialist Equality Party. David North, it is why I'm not giving you a scoop here. This is like wildly revealed information. His real name is David Green, and he is the owner of a non-union print shop in Michigan. You can't make this up, right? Which, I mean, whatever, right? I mean, he wants to keep his politics separate from his business. He uses a party name like a lot of communist groups do. You have a last name that's separate from your actual last name for party work. But many people have pointed out that the World Socialist website has this obsession with opposing the unions. That's a little weird, right? Generally, communist groups, they take the position, they oppose the labor union bureaucracy, but they support unions. They think unions are good. They just oppose the corrupt leadership of the unions. They want the unions to have a more revolutionary character. But people have pointed out that it is a little bit weird that David North is just obsessed with unions, wants to just completely destroy unions. And he himself owns a factory where workers don't have a union. And most workers in the newspaper industry are union. So many people have pointed out there's an element of hypocrisy there. What I find to be hilarious about David North, in addition to the fact that he's a Trotskyist, is that David North has a British accent, right? But he's not British. Okay? He's not British. He's from America. But he was mentored by Jerry Healy, who is a Trotskyite leader I do respect. And so I met David North. Every time David North appears, he's wearing a suit, and he's like a 3-piece suit where you have the vest underneath it, or and I swear David North is like, he's like a Bond villain, right? I swear I want to put a cat under his arms. And he's like, yes. I mean, when I saw him around the RT office, he's like, Christopher, the young people around the country are listening to me. I'm going to the universities and teaching them about Lenin and Trotsky, and they are hearing my words, Christopher. The workers soon will rise up against the capitalists. It's going to happen, Christopher. I shall rise. He's not fucking British. He's American, right? He's not actually British. I just can't get over this. He thinks part of being a communist is you have a fake British accent, and you wear a classy suit, and you talk about the workers and Trotskyism and the Bolshevik policies. I mean, he is like a caricature, right? He's like a character actor. I sent the video to a friend after his interview came out, and they said, "Are you sure that wasn't Sacha Baron Cohen pretending to be an evil communist Trotskyist?" He looks, I mean, he should have a monocle. He needs a monocle and a cat under his arm, and he's like, "Yes, the Fourth International." And his interview with Chris Hedges, I love it. He starts out, "Let me be clear, Christopher, I give no endorsement to this government in Russia or to Stalin. I am here to represent the politics of the Fourth International." I mean, it's like he has to like denounce and disavow RT before the interview starts. I mean, it's oh boy, that is David North. And when I read the history of David North and his organization, I lost all respect for him, mainly because of the fact that Jerry Healy, who was a very important British Trotskyist leader, who was a personal friend of Gaddafi, he got like wrecked. His organization got smeared because he had girlfriends, basically. The guy had girlfriends or whatever in the group. Sounds like Darth Vader. Yeah, I mean, he had girlfriends or whatever, and so at the time that Jerry Healy, who was a very important anti-imperialist, who was doing pro-Palestine work before anybody else was, Then David North was the leader of the American organization, and he made up some dialectical, oh, we disagree with Jerry Healy's view of dialectics, and he denounced Jerry Healy. And so the U.S. Workers League, which is now called the Socialist Equality Party, they broke with Jerry Healy, and they threw Jerry Healy under the bus. And so I view him as stabbing a very important anti-imperialist leader in the back. But he's not, the Union print shop, you can read articles about it. Google David North, David Green. I'm not the person to break that story. That's pretty weird. You can read all about that, about who David North really is. That's pretty weird, right? And then, from there, the British accent when he's not British, that's pretty weird. And so I guess David North is now being accused of being a Putin agent, and he ain't. He does good work for Assange. I'll give him credit for that. I wish he hadn't smeared the Rage Against the War Machine rally. And he does good work for Julian Assange. I'll give him credit for that. He's consistent in supporting Assange, but it's just, I don't know. I find him kind of comical. I find David North to kind of be comic relief. And when David North writes an article bashing our organization or something, I'm just like, okay, I'll take it. I challenged him to a debate on Twitter, and he wouldn't reply to me, but a bunch of his bots replied to me. And they were like, well, no, we don't want to debate you. You have a huge YouTube following and an organization, but we don't consider that important. It's like, are you complimenting me? Like, it was weird. It was like they were like listing off all of the things about me that were like admirable, and like, we don't admire any of that. It's like, all right, well, please insult me more often. Please, it's like, well, you may have high achievements, and you may be well known in certain circles, and you may have a very important job as an RT reporter, and you may have a very well respected social media following, YouTube channel. But sir, we do not consider this important. It's like, please insult me some more often. Like, geez, like, insult me more, please. Like, this is awesome. I never felt so important while I was being insulted by David North fans. It was kind of hilarious. And then, but anyway, David North, I just kind of view him as comic relief. And some of the reporting they do at World Socialist website is decent. Some of it's good stuff, and they've worked very hard to build that website over the years, etc. So there you go. That's what I'll say about that. But yeah, folks, if you want to send more super chats, they do support the work that I do. They support my ability to keep streaming every night here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. I stream more than anybody. Even on nights where I'm in a funny place like tonight, I get on here and stream. Might have been 8 minutes late, but here I am, and I'm answering your super chats. So yeah, if you can send super chats, get me talking. That's a great way to make this show entertaining. We just hit the second hour, and now we're going into the third hour. So yeah, anything you want me to talk about? Gleb, again, this is going to be all me bashing other Marxists tonight. I asked it a few weeks ago, but then my phone died. Can you repeat what you said earlier about the international Marxist tendency? Yes. So all right, so since we're talking about Trotskyism, we just talked about David North, and now we're talking about the international Marxist tendency. So Trotskyites divide into three. Leon Trotsky, leader of the Russian Revolution, had a falling out with Stalin, fled to the West, and became kind of a professional anti-communist, but claimed he was the true communist in the Soviet Union and abandoned communism. He was the real communist. After Trotsky died, various people that followed his teachings existed. Many of them were funded by the American government to counter real communism. That's been proven. Trotskyites divide into three general categories. The first category are what you call neo-Trotskyites. And neo-Trotskyites denounce all the communist governments and are largely based on college campuses. They're like kind of a new left, woke academic thing, right? And then you have what are called mainline Trotskyites. And mainline Trotskyites, they tend to be very obsessed with labor unions and support labor unions. They tend to kind of support socialist countries, kind of, but not really. Like they'll talk nice about Cuba sometimes, but they don't really support these governments. If there's ever a CIA rebellion against a communist government, they'll support it. And they tend to, they're always finding some way that they can, be on the side of the American government against the socialist countries, but they kind of support them. And they tend to want to form a labor party. The International Marxist Tendency in Britain, they are a mainline Trotskyist group. And they're the group that joined the Labor Party. And in Britain, the Labor Party has a rule that you can't be a Trotskyist or a communist of any kind and join the Labor Party. So they secretly joined the Labor Party, and they tried to infiltrate it from within. And in the 80s, they controlled the city council of Liverpool. Liverpool is an important industrial city in England, and they ran the city council as the Labor Party members. They secretly took it over. And they're a Trotskyist group in Britain they were started by a guy named Ted Grant, and they're just a mainline Trotskyist current. And in Britain, they join the Labor Party and they try to push the Labor Party. And in the United States, I think they used to call themselves Workers International League, but now they've kind of rebranded. They're called like Revolutionary Communist International or something like that, or Revolutionary Communists of America or something. And they've got a new social media. They're suddenly getting more visible these days. But they're just a Trotskyist group, and Trotskyism is against communist governments. Trotskyism is I've given classes and talked about why we don't agree with Trotskyism. Trotskyism is very much anti-communism. It's communism disguised. It's anti-communism wearing revolutionary clothing. And Jyoti Brar and others, we've done whole podcasts about that. I've written about that. I talk about that in the CPI manual. And both of them, I talk about Trotskyism in the new one and the old one. It's an important part of our understanding of why we reject Trotskyism and why we reject the permanent revolution, why we are city builders and we're not vandals. We're not part of the vandal tendency. And Trotskyism is very much about destruction, instability, chaos, etc. So that's the International Marxist Tendency, or mainline Trotskyists. Obsessed with labor unions, very into labor unions, joining the Labor Party, and they will sometimes support socialist countries, but not really. And then there's a third current of Trotskyism that is called Orthodox Trotskyism. And those are Trotskyists that are nuts. And that's what David North is. David North is from the World Socialist website. And then there's the Spartacist League. And then there's the Posadites that believe in UFOs, and the Spartacist League. One of their positions is they want to legalize pedophilia, and they say that World War II is still going on. Because Trotsky said World War II could only end with a global socialist revolution, so clearly World War II must be going on because Trotsky said it could only end with a world socialist revolution. And it's these are the Orthodox Trotskyists are the bonkers Trotskyists, right? They're and you don't see them as much anymore. There used to be 1 million of them, right? Whenever you'd go to a protest in New York City, there'd be 1 million tiny little Trotskyist groups that have 5 or 6 members that are trying to sell you a newspaper about how they're the one true party. You don't see them anymore. And I think nowadays people who would join one of those weird groups, they just get on the internet now. They just become internet communists. They don't join a group. But it used to be, before social media was a thing, that there would be 5 or, little tiny Trotskyist groups that you would see that had a magazine or a newspaper and 5 or 6 members, and they thought they were the one true party. I remember the first time I went to New York City, there was a guy who was handing out, I think it was the International Marxist Tendency. He was selling their magazine. And I said to him, "Oh, tell me about the International Marxist Tendency." And the guy just looked at me and said, "I don't know what this is, man. My girlfriend just makes me do this." I thought that was hilarious. It's like, "I don't know what this is, man. My girlfriend just makes me do this." I was like, "Oh, okay." So there you go. And there was another time I was at a rally in Washington, D.C., actually. And there was people handing out the magazine of one of the Enver Hoxha groups from Albania. It was the United States Marxist-Leninist Organization, right? USMLO. I think they're still around. The United States Marxist-Leninist Organization. Yep, they're still around. USMLO, right? And they were handing out the magazine of USMLO, All right. And go look at, USMLO, the United States Marxist-Leninist Organization. It probably has like 5 members or something. It's this tiny little group that supports that comes out of Albania, and they're like the Albania wing of communism, right? USMLO. And I remember there was somebody handing out USMLO's magazine, and I said to them, "Oh, can you tell me about the United States Marxist-Leninist Organization?" And she looked at me and she's like, "I don't know. I think we're like Marxist-Leninists or something." Who'd have guessed? Who'd have thought? But there you go. There you go. Wild times. Wild times. Are those the guys who became APL? I bet there was a split and they became APL, right? But there you go. There you go. But anyhow, yeah. So, all right. So now that we've talked about Trotskyism for a good hour, which we shouldn't have done, but I mean, it was probably 10 minutes. We didn't talk about Trotskyism that long. Those were good questions. David North is a funny character, and we talked about IMT again. I hope that was helpful, Gleb. You're a beloved member of our community, and it's an important question because people are going to see them, right? I mean, I see their stuff. I'm starting to see their stuff on the subways and stuff. So, it's important to talk about who they are. But alrighty. How is the news about the petrodollar deal being over? How is that significant? It's very significant. All right. So for those of you who may not be familiar, after the end of the Second World War, you had the Bretton Woods meeting. And in Bretton Woods, they reset the financial system for the United States after the Second World War, or not for the United States, for the Western world, for the non-communist world. They set up the financial system. And that's where we got the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. That's where we got the World Bank. And part of the Bretton Woods system was that they created what was called the petrodollar, which is that oil would only be sold in dollars. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, the petrodollar was the way the United States pretty much ruled the world. If one country buys oil from another country, they have to buy it in dollars, US dollars. And US dollars became the only currency with which one could trade oil. And that, the value of a currency goes up the more people that use it. So if everyone in the world who's using the world's most vital commodity is using US currency, that makes the US dollar very valuable. Well, the petrodollar has been broken. Iran has sold oil to India without the US dollar. And it hasn't been supreme as it once was, right? I mean, in the last decade or so, we've seen various countries buying oil, selling oil, not with US dollars. But now the fact that the deal itself has been repudiated, that all the countries that had agreed to only sell oil in dollars are now going, yeah, we don't agree with that anymore. That's big. And if you want to talk about what that means for us, that means that our currency in the United States, the US dollar, could significantly decrease in value, right? Which is what many people have been predicting for a long time. And these sanctions the USA puts on other countries, and the BRICS, the rise of trade between different countries, the fact that the US dollar is not the currency that's being used in international transactions in the same way it once was, that's going to catch up with us pretty soon. And the dollar is going to lose its value, right? And it's already losing its value. That's inflation. I mean, we're already dealing with that. So that's something to be aware of. That's something to keep in mind. So yeah, it is a very big deal. And it's something that a lot of people, when they hear about economics, they just assume they can't understand it. Well, it's not that hard to understand, right? The more that a currency is used, the more people around the world that use the British pound, the more valuable the pound is. The more people around the world that use the Russian ruble, the more valuable the ruble is. So the more people around the world that use the US dollar, the more valuable the US dollar is. So the US dollar had something really good going for it, which is anyone who bought and sold oil had to do it with US dollars. And that has gradually been fading out. And now that's over. That is no longer the case. And that is a pretty darn big deal. That's a pretty darn big deal. Can you explain liberation theology, which emerged in the 60s and 70s in Latin America, focusing on social justice and human rights? Absolutely. Liberation theology. And I want to clarify, right? Because a lot of people think that my Christian socialism is liberation theology. I have nothing against liberation theology. I actually look up to a lot of, liberation theologists, but I am not an adherent of liberation theology because liberation theology is Roman Catholic. And liberation theology was a movement that emerged in the 1960s and 70s, mainly in South and Central America, among Catholic priests who became sympathetic to communism. And they interpreted the Catholic social teaching as being in line with Cuba, in line with various Marxist groups. You had I think there was a priest in El Salvador, Oscar Romero, who was martyred, right? And he was killed. And that you had a wave, and this was a big part of the Nicaraguan revolution. In the 70s in Nicaragua, you had what they called the People's Church, and it was a Christian movement that was like in the Catholic Church that was promoting socialism and communism. You had the People's Church, and you had Oscar Romero, who was in El Salvador, and he was a priest, he was a bishop, he was a high-ranking clergyman who was basically an ally and friend of the communists. It was a widespread movement. And I mean, the government of Nicaragua is basically, it is basically a liberation theology government, right? It says Nicaragua's constitution, the preamble, acknowledges that they are Christians who believe in God. In our book, Jesus is a Socialist, we actually have the preamble of the Nicaraguan Constitution. Let me Google it. Nicaraguan Constitution. I'll read you what it says. But Nicaragua, the Sandinistas, the socialist, Marxist, current, they took power and they wrote a new constitution for Nicaragua, the 1987 Nicaraguan Constitution. Right. This is the preamble of it. Invoking the struggle of our indigenous ancestors, the spirit of Central American unity, and the combative tradition of our people, who, inspired by the example of Jose Dolores Estrada, Andres Castro, and Emmanuel Mangalo, destroyed the dominion of foreign adventurers and defeated North American intervention and national war, the protagonist of the cultural independence of the nation, the universal poet Ruben Diario, the anti-interventionist actions of Benjamin Zeldin, the general of free people Augusto Sandino, the father of popular anti-imperialist revolution, the heroic action of Roberto Perez, initiator and beginning of the end of dictatorship, and the example of Carlos Fonseca, the founder of Sandino's legacy, the founder of the Sandinista National Liberation Front and leader of the revolution, the martyr of public liberties, Dr. Pedro Hakan Camero Cardinal, the Cardinal of Peace and Reconciliation, Cardinal Miguel Obando Bravo, the generations of heroes and martyrs who forged and carried forward the liberation struggle of national independence. In the name of the Nicaraguan people, all democratic, patriotic, and revolutionary parties and organizations of Nicaragua, its men, its women, its workers, its peasants, its glorious youth, its heroic mothers, those Christians who, inspired by their belief in God, have joined and committed themselves to the struggle for the liberation of the oppressed, its patriotic intellectuals, and all those who, through their productive work, contribute to the defense of the homeland. Those who offer their lives in fighting against imperialist aggression to guarantee happiness for new generations, for the institutionalization of the achievements of the revolution, and the establishment of a new society that eliminates all forms of exploitation and achieves economic, political, and social equality among Nicaraguans and absolute respect for human rights, for the homeland, for the revolution, for the unity of the nation, and for peace, we promulgate the following political constitution for the Republic of Nicaragua. That is the preamble of the Nicaraguan Constitution. And you'll recall there is one line in there. I will repeat. I'm not going to repeat the whole thing. Those Christians who, inspired by their belief in God, have joined and committed themselves to the struggle and liberation of the oppressed. Right? That is in the Nicaraguan Constitution. Liberation theology is part of their belief. And the ruling party of Nicaragua, the Sandinistas, right, named after Sandino, the national liberation hero of Nicaragua, they are a Christian political party. That is written into their, constitution. They are a communist Marxist government, but Christianity is part of their ruling ideology. And that's because of liberation theology. There's a very good talk given by Herbert Apotheker from UCLA, and I'll put a link in, where he talks about, and Herbert Apotheker was a communist, but he talks about how in the 60s there was kind of a reconciliation between the Catholic, some wings of the Catholic Church and the communist movement globally. And I'll link that. This is, Herbert Apotheker speaking at UCLA. And the liberation theology, UCLA, Herbert Apotheker. And he gives a whole talk about liberation theology when it was very new. This talk is from the 60s, I think, and you can listen to it. And Herbert Apotheker, the respected communist historian, is invited to speak at UCLA. And his whole talk is about liberation theology and why there's now reconciliation between the church, the Catholic Church, and communism. And that liberation theology is a Roman Catholic movement that embraced Marxism. The current Pope, interestingly, he is not a liberation theologist. Now, this is very interesting. He says he embraces Catholic social teaching, right? And the Catholic Church, the entire Catholic Church has what's called Catholic social teaching. And Catholic social teaching basically says they reject both capitalism and communism. They say that Marxism is godless, that Marxism is atheistic, and that Marxism says people act according to their economic conditions. Whereas the Catholic Church believes that you can still do the right thing no matter what the economic circumstances are. And so they reject Marxism on those grounds. They also reject capitalism because they argue that that human beings have an obligation to others, and that capitalism is the rule of money, and that money is a corrupt, evil force, as the Bible says, right? I mean, the Bible says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and I believe Jesus told his followers, you can either serve God or you can serve money, but you can't serve both. And that there are many places. I mean, we published a whole book, Jesus is a Socialist, with CPI, where there's many places in the Bible that it condemns the rule of money. It talks about justice for the poor, etc. So the Catholic social teaching is kind of vague, but we don't believe in free market capitalism. We also don't believe in Marxism and communism. Now, liberation theology says, actually, we don't have a problem with communism, right? The two can kind of overlap. And the Pope is critical of capitalism, but he rejects any association with Marxism, right? The current Pope has spoken against capitalism more than any other Pope in recent times. I mean, Pope Francis has really emphasized Catholic social teaching and its critique of capitalism, but he has always said he does not agree with Marxism, right? Because Marxism is atheistic and economic determinist, etc. But the thing is, I embrace Marxism, but I also am not an atheist. I think that, look, I'll just say this, right? If the guy who discovered gravity was a Buddhist, would that mean Buddhism was true? If the guy who, if Gregor Mendel, the guy who discovered, modern genetics, if he was Catholic, would that mean Catholicism was true? No, right? I think that Karl Marx discovered the objective laws of human history, and he understood basic facts about human beings and the economy, and how human beings go from one mode of production to a higher mode of production, how we've gone from hunter-gatherer civilization to slavery to feudalism to capitalism. And then, after Marx, you had Lenin, who discovered capitalism and entered the stage of imperialism. And then countries around the world started fighting imperialism and establishing socialism to break out of imperialism. And eventually socialism will defeat imperialism, and socialism will give wage to a higher stage called communism. And that's a world of vast abundance in which there is no inequality. I think that Marx discovered that, and he was very correct in discovering that. Does that mean Marx was right about his religious views? No. It just means that Marx, he understood the objective laws of history. He understood how civilizations develop, and he understood that human beings are constantly reinventing our relationship with nature and moving toward a higher plane of production. Marx was right about a lot of things. Was Marx right about God? No. Was Marx right about dialectical materialism? I don't think so. Right? I mean, conflict certainly drives forward history, but conflict also can be resolved. You can have reconciliation. Right. And that conflict in and of itself is not a good, and that is where he's wrong. Right. In feudalism, there is no conflict. Everyone's born into their place. So Marx, coming out of feudalism, part of that revolutionary energy coming out of feudalism. He says, oh, conflict is always good. Well, there's a process, right? There's division, one will divide into two, but then there can be reconciliation, right? And they can reunify and be stronger. And that conflict in and of itself is not necessarily good, right? It can lead to atomization. And I think that that's what the dialectical philosophy is missing. So I'm critical of Marx's philosophy. I'm critical of dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism, the foundation of Karl Marx's philosophy, is that all that exists is matter. All that exists is matter. So he rejects the existence of anything spiritual, right? That all that exists is matter, right? Thoughts, ideas, feelings are just a reflection of the material world. But that matter is constantly in a state of change, and that change is driven forward by contradiction, by things that disagree, clashing with each other, right? That's dialectical materialism, right? And I am at the point where I do think that spiritual forces exist. I don't think that my thoughts are just because I have a piece of matter in my head called a brain. I think I do have a spiritual existence. I think I have a soul. I have a spiritual existence. I do believe that feelings can change material, right? Mind over matter. If you feel a certain way, right, that can change the way your body. I mean, I do think that learning to have a positive attitude and learning to view the world in an optimistic way can make a difference, right? So I am not a full Marxist, I guess, because I reject dialectical materialism. I believe I reject the dialectic, in that I believe reconciliation and bonding and relationships, these things can be healthy, and that it's not all about conflict. And I'm not a materialist, because I do believe that there is spiritual power. The material world exists and the spiritual world also exists. Okay. And the two, obviously, human beings, we have a little bit of both. We have a soul, but we also have a physical body. And if we were just a body, we would be animals. And if we were just a soul, we would have no body. Right. And so anyway, I could go on about all this stuff all night. But yeah, I'm not a classical Marxist in that sense, but I do think Marx, understood the objective laws of history. He understood the economic problems of capitalism. Socialism was around long before Karl Marx, but Marx, understood socialism in a way, in a context of history marching forward. I do believe history is marching forward. I do believe human beings are moving toward a greater stage of perfection. I fundamentally believe in historical progress. So yeah, there you go. There you go. Those are my views. And liberation theology is a Roman Catholic movement that found kind of unity between the Catholic social teaching and communism, and Oscar Romero, etc. The political terms don't mean what we've all been taught they mean, or haven't you noticed? Exploring derivation etymology is a form of critical understanding to them. Well, this is, I think, what you're getting at, 72 marshmallows there, right? Wait. Oh, I missed a bunch. Hold up. There's history no one is allowed to talk about. No, you won't be bashing me. I'm your cantilever. Can I speak freely here? What are you talking about? You lost me. You lost me there. Oh, there's John. Okay. Hold up. Oh, all right. Okay, so I did the liberation theology. I did John. So now I will respond to you, 72 marshmallows. I think what you're getting at there is that the way communists use words, I've noticed, is not the way other people use them, and that's a bit of a problem, right? And I that was one thing that I really, I think the communists need to do better about, right? Which is that when I first came around communist groups, when I was like 14, 15, they were always talking about the contradiction, the contradiction, the contradiction. I had no idea what they're talking about. The contradiction, the contradiction. What the hell are they talking about? Contradiction was generally the context that I knew the word is if my mom says, all right, it's raining outside. And I say, no, Mom, it's not raining. It's sunny. She says, you're contradicting me. Stop contradicting me. That's what I thought contradiction meant. And that's what it means to most people. To Marxists, contradiction refers to dialectics. When two things clash with each other in order to advance history, That's called contradiction. When two things are struggling with each other and history is advancing because of their struggle. And I can guarantee you the people I heard talking about, well, there's the contradictions of the contradictions, the contradictions. I can guarantee you they didn't know that either. They didn't know what that meant either. They were bluffing, right? And it was years before I really understood what that meant. I'd really read enough Marxism. I'd read William Z. Foster and his History of the Three Internationals and such. I actually knew what that was. Another term that I see all the time get misused, neoliberal. Neoliberal, right? What does neoliberal mean? A lot of people misuse the word neoliberal and they think it refers to moderate Democrats, right? There's liberals and then there's very moderate liberals. They're neoliberals. No, that's not what the term means. Neoliberalism is an economic theory, and it means that the government should be less and less involved in the economy. It is an economic theory, right? It is a form of economic thought. It's most associated with Milton Friedman. It is a form of free market ideology that people associate with Milton Friedman and his monetary theories, etc. It's kind of like free market libertarianism or classical liberalism, but it's much more, it's a little bit more tangible. It's the idea that we should privatize things. We should have private prisons because it's always better if a private company does it. We should privatize our schools, have charter schools, schools for profit, right? It's about getting the government out of the economy, bringing in private. It's like Javier Milei. That's what neoliberalism is. But if you don't explain that and you just use the word and you don't explain what it means, a lot of people in the room are going to start using that word and they're going to think it means moderate Democrat. It has nothing to do with liberals and conservatives. It has nothing to do with that. It's about economic liberalism, getting the government out of the economy. So there's that, right? What's another word that communists use and they use it differently? I don't know. There's a couple other ones that communists use and they use it weird. Oh, reactionary, right? All right. So in the Marxist understanding, in politics, you have revolutionaries that want to create a new social system, want to get to a higher social system. You have reformers that want to reform the social system as it is. They would just want to take the current system and adjust it to make it better. You have conservatives that want to preserve the current system. And then you have reactionaries. And those are people that want to go backward. They want to go backwards. They want to move the wheels of history backward. And they're called reactionaries. And that comes from the French Revolution. There were people who reacted to the French Revolution by wanting to bring the king back. And so that's where it comes from, right? Just like left and right come from the French Revolution. They were reactionaries, right? Now, it just means, people, if you wanted to bring slavery back, you're a reactionary because we abolished slavery and that was progress. If you want to, get rid of women's right to vote, you're a reactionary, right? Because you want it. We already have the right of women to vote, and that was a great advance. However, I have heard people use that term incorrectly, right? And they call it reactive, right? If you're reacting to other people, that's called being reactive. But being reactionary means that you want to go backwards. So, that's what that means. Gabby, shout out to you, Gabby. You're on all of our minds. We're thinking about you. You're a great valued member of our community. I have said my position on these Palestine rallies, which is number one, I agree with the cause 100%. And I'm glad that they're raising awareness about it, right? They are standing up. They're opposing what Israel's doing. And there's genocide going on in Gaza. And so I'm with them on that. I don't agree with the messaging style. They are not reaching out to average Americans. They're not framing it as, it would be in America's interest. We should spend money here for jobs and schools and healthcare, not on funding Israel's crimes. And the protests are done in a way that comes across as very hostile and hateful towards average Americans, even though the majority of Americans agree with them. And yes, there's vandalism and the people there have masks over their faces. And when I go and try to cover the rallies, there's always somebody who threatens me and, wants to beat me up or, saw me on social media and wants to harass me. And I mean, while I agree with the message of the rallies, which is stop funding Israel's crimes, I don't agree with the tone. The messaging style is very hateful, very angry, very very negative toward the American people. They say things like America is a racist settler country just like Israel. They're like going out of their way. They're like going out of their way to offend average Americans. It's not strategic and it's not helpful. Yeah, they are making support for Palestine look as unappealing as possible. So there you go. What kind of music do you listen to calm your mind? Gabby, every day I wake up in the morning with Bach, Beethoven, or Mozart. I put on the Beethoven symphonies. I put on Mozart. I put on Beethoven. I also, I put on Chopin nocturnes in order to go to sleep. You can just listen to all the nocturnes of Chopin. And I have actually lately, just because I was out in Los Angeles and such, and I sometimes will put on the holy songs of the Unification Church, right? They have what's called the holy songs, and they have a YouTube track of just the holy songs of the Unification Church and kind of peaceful, Korean music. And I listen to that sometimes too. And if I'm trying to calm my mind, I do Bach, Beethoven, or Mozart. I do Chopin. And I do the Unification Church holy songs. There's so I mean, if you want to calm, I would recommend any of those. But yeah, the Bach, Beethoven, Mozart thing, I've been doing that for years. It's a great way to start the day, and it's a great way to end the day. And the same with Chopin nocturnes. They're a great way to go to sleep at night. They're very calming, etc. And the Unification Church holy songs are also very soothing. So there you go. There you go. I hope that's helpful. Yeah. And I think that's everybody. I think that's all the super chats for tonight. So I'm going to put on Zionism is un-American as it puts Israel above the US. I agree. I 100% agree. Here, I will show you. I think I've still got our Portland, our Palestine for Portland. Do we still have that? Or maybe I put it in CPI videos. We were in the streets of Portland talking about Palestine. Yeah, here we go. Right. This was our. That's going to be tricky. Free Palestine. More and more money on Israeli atrocities and funding Israel's crimes against the Palestinians. We're here to oppose that. We're here to oppose that. Jobs and schools in America, not weapons for Israel. Free Palestine. Free Palestine.
Sucks outside.
It does. Go ahead, Noah, just a little bit. Hi, how you doing? Great.
Hi.
What?
Yeah. Super here.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. Are you CPUSA?
No, we're the Center for Political Innovation.
Okay.
Yeah. You should check us out. There's a couple of them. We're having a convention. It's our national convention. It's going to be on Saturday in Oregon City. So, a lot of people are coming to town, so it's going to be good. Good to meet you. My name's Caleb, by the way. What's your name? The weather's starting to slightly improve.
A little bit. It does look like there's a parking lot there.
I don't like it. Money for jobs and schools in America, not weapons for Israel to murder Palestinians. We're out here saying jobs and schools here in America, not weapons for the Israeli murderers. That's what we're here to say. Absolutely. We're having a convention this weekend. We're out here saying free Palestine, free Palestine. We're here to say that this country could have a whole great future beyond imperialism. beyond the rule of the big corporations and banks and monopolies, we could rebuild this country and make it into something beautiful. The global imperialist system is oppressing people across the planet, and it's also oppressing people right here. We are against the imperialist system. We are for a new America where working families have what they need, and growth and innovation is promoted beyond the rule of profiteers. We are opposed to the system that spreads war and spreads destruction across the planet to enrich a small group of billionaire monopolies. And that includes backing up Israel and its crimes against the Palestinian people. We are for a whole new society, a new America, where the working class controls the means of production, the banks, factories, and industries. A new America where human needs come first, not the profits of a wealthy few. A new America where innovation and scientific advances are being carried out and promoted. That's what we're for. A whole new America under the rule of working people. That's what we're out here to promote today.
Decolonizing the Starbucks here.
Yeah, so that's what we did in Oregon, and that's the way we do it. You know, I feel like that is the winning message. And if the protests had that message, a lot more people would support them, and a lot of Trump people would probably support him. And that's been my position. So I'm not against the protest per se. I just wish they would be doing it in a winning way, in a way that was not alienating the American people. So there you go. All right. Okay, folks. Well, listen, it's been fun. I am at the end of my rope. I apologize to Chris H for getting all fired up. And but you know, hey, that's what you all came here to see, right? You came here to see the show. I'm actually very tired tonight. Hopefully I get a good sleep tonight. I might stream tomorrow night. It'll be late if I stream tomorrow night. Got something in the evening, but I probably will come home afterwards. So I'll probably stream tomorrow night, but it'll be late. But yeah, it's been fun, folks. I'm on here streaming. Hey, you know, I stream every night, even nights like this where I'm feeling pretty tired and wiped. I stream and it gets wild. Tonight I came on here to talk about Elon Musk, and then we talked about Jordan Peterson, and we talked about communism, and we talked about Trotskyists, and we talked about religion, and we talked about liberation theology and Palestine, and Phil is here, and Gabby is here, and hey, you know what I mean? Hey, you know, we love you, Chris. We're doing the best we can. So, you know, hey, good times. So, yeah, talk to y'all soon. I'll be back. Talk to you soon. Talk to you soon. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.